Hey guys. Tonight, we travel back in time back to ancient Rome. And you're not just touring the ruins. Nope. You're headed straight into the belly of the beast, the Colosseum, where blood, sand, and drama ruled the day. You're standing in line with a crowd of toga-wrapped citizens, the air thick with sweat, wine, and maybe a whiff of questionable hygiene. Around you, thousands of voices build to a low roar, hungry for the day's entertainment. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, especially if your name's on the list of unlucky souls shoved through the gladiator gate with no armor and a stick. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step past the towering arches and into a smell that hits like a punch. Sweat, Earone, damp stone, and something meaty. Probably don't want to guess too hard. The Colosseum's taller than you expected, nearly 160 feet of stacked stone, groaning wood, and echoes that carry every footstep. You've got a seat. Technically. But unless you're a senator or an elite, your backside's hitting marble. Not cushion. Still, even from here, you can see it all. The sun spills across the sand, which isn't just decorative, it's there to soak up the blood. Efficient. If grim, a trumpet blares. You flinch. It's the signal. Below, a gate creaks open, and two men step out. One is hulking, glinting with metal and polished leather. The other? He's barefoot, wearing what looks like a stitched-together tunic and holding a net. His arm trembles slightly. The crowd notices. A wave of laughter rolls through the seats. You feel it like a chill. This isn't fair. It's not supposed to be. Gladiator matches were marketed like epic duels of equal strength versus skill. Sword versus spear. But in practice, not so balanced. The Colosseum loved a story. And the audience didn't want justice. They wanted drama. So the fights were often rigged for spectacle. Pairs with mismatched gear, uneven experience, or even pre-scripted outcomes. A heavily armored Murmillo against a barely trained slave? Sure. A convicted thief handed a kitchen knife and told to make it interesting? Why not? Even the types of gladiators were designed for showy contrast. Like you're watching a bizarre ancient rock-paper-scissors match. The Retiarius net and Trident guy versus a Secutor with smooth armor designed to avoid getting tangled. Great, in theory, until the Retiarius slips, loses his net, and has to improvise with a trident that's more ceremonial than deadly. Historians still argue whether most matches were truly to the death, or if many ended when one fighter was clearly overpowered. The evidence is foggy. Some graffiti suggests frequent mercy, but skeletal remains tell a rougher story. What's clear is that death wasn't unusual, and survival didn't always depend on skill. The gate opens again. Two more fighters enter. This time, it's over before you blink. One guy trips. The other pounces. It's more slaughter than sport. And yet the crowd erupts, like someone just hit a home run. Breadcrumbs fly. Someone starts a chant. You wonder if anyone even remembers the loser's name. To the Romans, this was more than sport. It was a performance, a moral fable, dressed in armor and screams. Victories proved the gods favored strength. Deaths reaffirmed Roman dominance. Even if the matches were unfair, they taught lessons about discipline, courage, and fate. Right, because there's nothing like a terrified prisoner skewered by a professional to inspire civic virtue. Some of the most famous gladiators weren't noble warriors, but crowd favorites with flair. They'd milk the fight stall, showboat, grin at the crowd, a wink before the final blow. That kind of charm could earn you fans, gifts, and even a weird kind of freedom if you lasted long enough. You shift on your cold stone seat. Below, workers dash across the arena, dragging the bodies away, like props being cleared for the next act. The sand is raked smooth. Another gate opens. Now it's animals. A thin man in a tattered tunic is shoved forward. He squints into the light, then looks up. A door in the opposite wall opens slowly. A lion steps out. Real, massive, and clearly very, very hungry. The man doesn't run. He doesn't charge. He just folds, kneels, lowers his head. The crowd quiets. Some cheer. Some hiss. But most just watch. Later, historians would try to make sense of this moment. Was it bravery, despair, protest, or just fatigue? You don't know, but you remember his stillness. And the way the lion didn't pounce right away, just paced and stared. And somehow, to that pause, it's the most honest moment of the whole day. The next morning, you wake with the scent of vinegar wine still in your nose, and your thighs sore from climbing ancient steps in sandals that clearly weren't designed with stadium seating in mind. But the Colosseum doesn't sleep for long. Neither do its fans. The crowds are already pouring in again tunic-clad merchants, perfumed nobles, gossiping matrons, and sticky-fingered kids trying to sneak in without a ticket. You fall into step among them, shuffling up the same ramps Roman butchers, senators, and bakers did 2,000 years ago. The air feels warmer today, but that might just be the combined body heat of 50. 0. Humans eager to see someone get maimed before lunch. You find your seat again still hard. Still, without a cushion and settle in. But now your eyes wander up and around. You start noticing things. Details. Layers. Not just in the marble and the sand below, but in the social structure stacked all around you. Where you sat told the world exactly who you were. And more importantly, who you weren't. Down at arena level, the front rows were for the elite senators, priests, high-ranking officers. They got the best views, and often the best say in who lived or died. Just behind them sat the equestrians, the wealthy middle class, a little farther back, the everyday Roman citizens. And way up in the rafters, the women, the poor, the enslaved, and anyone else who didn't count. The nosebleed seats weren't just about vertigo, they were about status. You think you're being subtle as you glance at the person next to you, but they give you a smirk, like they've already clocked your rank by the state of your belt. And honestly, You're not sure if that stain is wine, sweat, or regret. What's fascinating is how rigid and theatrical all this was. These weren't just seats, they were statements, invitations to watch power in action. The Colosseum was more than a stadium. It was a social diagram carved in limestone. Every section, a sermon. Every row, a reminder. Historians still argue whether these seating rules were strictly enforced at every show or mostly idealized in public inscriptions. But many believe ushers with batons helped keep the hierarchy visible, and any accidental encroachments were swiftly corrected, usually with a shove and a snarl. Up in the bleachers. The sun bakes your shoulders. You envy the shadow of the velarium, a massive canvas awning suspended over the Colosseum's upper deck by an army of sailors trained to rig it like a ship. On windier days, it was less shade and more slapstick. Nightmare. Imagine 240 massive sailcloths flapping unpredictably above 50. Oh, zero people. You'd think Rome had enough drama without spontaneous tent collapses. Down below, the pre-show begins. A troupe of acrobats flips across the sand. Jugglers toss bronze spheres and knives. Musicians play shrill reed flutes, you're almost sure are meant to be irritating. It's not just for fun. This is Rome's version of a warm-up act, designed to distract the audience from the real point: violence in an hour or less. You nibble on a bit of bread passed your way. It's stale. But hey, free foods. Free food. The emperors often funded these games, not out of pure generosity, but because pleasing the masses was the best political insurance money could buy. Bread and circuses. Feed their bellies. Thrill their eyes. Keep them distracted from real problems like taxes, revolts, or the occasional plague. And the people loved it. Some wrote fan letters. Others scratched the names of their favorite gladiators into walls, like ancient graffiti influencers. Verus, best fighter, or Secundus forever. A few even wore crude charms, said to be soaked in gladiator sweat. Apparently, there's nothing like a blood-stained armband to scream fashion statement. You shift your weight, trying to stretch your legs without elbowing the stranger beside you. As you lean, you catch the sound of someone muttering nearby. A woman, reciting odds. She's taking bets. You hadn't even noticed the small crowd forming around her, exchanging coins and whispers. Gambling wasn't legal, but that didn't stop anyone. If there was a match, there were wagers. And if you think today's sports fans get riled up, ancient Roman crowds could tip into riots. Some would throw fruit, coins, or worse, if they didn't like the outcome. Emperors sometimes had to flee mid-show if the crowd turned ugly. Imagine being booed by 50. Zero people at once. That's worse than getting unfollowed in real time. Below, the gates open again. The main event is about to begin. Two figures enter on. A towering Murmillo, decked in fish-scale armor, with a helmet so heavy it clinks when he breathes. The other, a Thrax, faster, leaner, armed with a curved blade and a square shield. This one's a more balanced match. The crowd leans forward like a single living creature. You watch every step, every feint, every clang of metal. The Murmillo swings wide, heavy and slow. The Thrax ducks, counters, but barely misses his mark. The crowd gasps. This isn't just about strength. It's about performance, about posture, pacing, rhythm. The best gladiators knew how to bleed just enough to look dramatic without getting killed. They were athletes. Yes, but also actors. The arena was their stage, the audience their judge, and the emperor? Well, he was the final curtain. It doesn't end in death. Not today. The Murmillo yields, drops to one knee, and raises two fingers, the ancient plea for mercy. The emperor raises his hand, a pose. Then, the thumb, down, sideways, the crowd roars. The Thrakes turns, raises his blade and halts, mercy granted. Today, anyway, you linger in your seat a little longer this time. The crowd is restless again, buzzing with half-baked opinions and spilled wine. Someone behind you loudly insists, the Murmillo threw the fight. Another argues it was staged from the beginning, that the emperor owed someone's cousin a favor and orchestrated the whole thing. You roll your eyes, but stay quiet. Everyone's an expert when they're not the one dodging steel in the dirt. The arena workers mostly enslaved men. Some, just teenagers, sprint across the sand to clean up. They rake the blood-soaked layer smooth again, dragging it like frosting over a very unfortunate cake. You watch them work and try not to think about how many gallons of blood the Colosseum must have soaked up over the years. It probably has its own scent by now. Like rust and regret. Another trumpet. Another gate opens. This time, the fighter looks different. He's thin, not in the lean, wiry way of a trained athlete, but in the hollow-eyed, underfed, possibly poisoned, once sort of way. His gear is basic. Leather straps, a wooden shield, a dull sword that looks like it might snap in a breeze. He shuffles forward, blinking against the sun. A hush falls across the crowd, not out of reverence, but confusion. You lean toward the stranger next to you. What's the story here? Condemned criminal, they say, cracking sunflower seeds with their teeth. Probably stole a loaf of bread or annoyed the wrong senator. You nod. But your good twists. The crowd's energy has shifted. Not excited. Not angry. Just eager. Like they smell blood before the cut. His opponent enters with flair bigger, stronger, glowing with oil and confidence. The contrast is absurd. It's not a fight. It's a message, and that was often the point. Many gladiators weren't gladiators by choice. Some were prisoners of war. Others were enslaved people bought specifically for the arena. But there were also criminals condemned to die by the sword or by beast. And those sentences played out in front of a crowd drunk on spectacle. It wasn't enough to execute someone. Rome needed to watch it happen with drama, with ceremony, with snacks. Historians still argue whether these executions were technically part of the games or considered separate events. But when they took place inside the arena, surrounded by cheering citizens, it's hard to imagine a distinction mattered much to the people involved. The crowd starts chanting something. A name? An insult? You're not sure. The condemned man flinches. His opponent circles him slowly. Blade drawn. Tip, dragging little trails in the sand. There's a moment brief, barely noticeable, when the criminal's knees buckle, and you think he might faint. Instead, he raises his shield. Stand straighter. Maybe he wants to die on his feet. Maybe he just doesn't want to give them the satisfaction. It doesn't last long. One lunge. One blow. The crowd erupts. A child in front of you claps. You look away. Back then, the line between fighter and fodder was razor thin. Some gladiators entered the arena by force. Others volunteered. Shocking, right? But it's true. Some Roman citizens signed up to fight. Maybe they were broke. Maybe they were thrill seekers. Or maybe they were just really bad at long-term planning. These octorati trained alongside the enslaved at gladiator schools called ludiware. Routines were brutal, and discipline came with a side of whips. They slept in cells, ate barley porridge, drilled day and night. But they also learned to fight, to perform, to survive. And if they were good, they could become stars. But here's the thing. Becoming a gladiator voluntarily wasn't exactly noble. In fact, it was scandalous. Roman society prized dignitassioner, status, restraint. Gladiators were the opposite, sweaty, chauve, often shirtless. They bled for public amusement. So while crowds adored them, elite Romans often treated them like living contradictions, admired on the sand. Shunned in the street, some wore masks to hide their identities. Others kept secret lovers. A few had their own groupies. Even back then, gladiator-themed graffiti litters the ruins of Pompeii. Crescents. The net fighter makes the girls sigh. Or Calidus, the heartthrob of the arena. Fame and danger, all in one messy package. You imagine yourself in a ludus for a moment, waking before dawn, eating cold lentils, swinging a wooden sword until your arms tremble, trying to guess who will survive the month, trying to become something more than a name on a scroll, and maybe, just maybe, earning your freedom. There was a reward for surviving enough fights. It was called the rudisa wooden sword, symbolizing release. Retired gladiators were rare, but not mythical. A few even opened their own schools, training the next round of doomed hopefuls. Others just faded into the crowd. Broken, but breathing, back in the arena. Another pair enters. Both look skilled, balanced. The crowd leans in again, greedy for real tension. But you keep thinking about the man who didn't have a chance, who stood with shaking hands and tried anyway, who wasn't trained, or prepared, or armored, just condemned, and watched, and remembered. You trudge slowly toward the back corridors of the Colosseum, ducking your head as you step under one of the side arches, away from the noise and sunlight of the main arena. The marble turns to packed earth beneath your feet. The light dimmer. The air thick with something heavier than dust sweat. Fear. And the lingering copper tang of old blood. These tunnels are where the games begin long before a blade is drawn. Welcome to the ludus, the gladiator school, where training for death looks suspiciously like prison with a personal trainer. You follow the sound of grunts and clanging metal through a narrow passage that opens into a training yard surrounded by tall stone walls. Inside, a dozen men move in tight, calculated patterns, Some swing wooden practice swords, their arms trembling with exhaustion. Others kneel in the sun, strapping on armor, as a grizzled instructor bellows corrections in a voice so hoarse, it sounds like he's been screaming since the Republic fell. This isn't casual exercise. This is survival training. Every thrust, block, and dodge could be the difference between cheers and your intestines on public display. You sit near a low wall, careful not to get too close to the man sharpening a trident with a whetstone that's been worn to a pebble. His eyes flick up at you once, then return to his work. Not unfriendly, just resigned, like someone who's seen too many new faces and knows most don't stick around long. Gladiators didn't just wake up and walk into the arena. First came months, sometimes years of grueling instruction. You trained like a soldier, but lived like livestock. Most schools had strict discipline, often enforced with beatings. Food was basic: barley, beans, and whatever passed for broth. Muscle mattered more than morale. And if you thought your roommate situation was rough, imagine sharing a windowless cell with a dozen other nervous trainees, all trying not to get attached because they might be bleeding out beside you by next week. The strange part, it wasn't always awful. Some gladiators reportedly formed tight bonds. They sparred together, ate together, sometimes even fought side by side in paired matches. The ludus was brutal, but it was also one of the few places in Roman society where your background didn't matter, only your skill. You watch two fighters square off in the center yard. One lunges. The other deflects with a shield that sends dust flying. They move quickly, but not recklessly. This is choreographed chaos. Each step drilled into muscle memory by endless repetition. And somewhere behind all this effort is a strange truth. No matter how much they trained, none of it guaranteed anything once they were in the Colosseum. Historians still debate how much control gladiators had over their performances. Were they fully improvising? Was there choreography? Or were some matches even scripted? Start to finish. Like ancient wrestling theater? We'll never know for sure. But the best fighters often lived longer by making it look exciting, bleeding, just enough to sell the moment, but not enough to die. You edge closer to a rack of practice helmets. They're dented. Some split down the side. And every single one smells like a century of dried sweat. You reach out and lift one's heavier than you expect. And wearing it would feel like having a cooking pot strapped to your head during a marathon. Good luck hearing anything. Or breathing. A few trainees notice your presence now. 1. A wiry man with a long scar down his cheek leans over. "First day?" he asks with a crooked grin. You shrug. "Just visiting." He laughs. "Smart. Leave while you still can." "Oh, can?" Someone else calls out from the edge of the ring. "Tell him about the etiquette." "Ah yes, gladiator etiquette." Because even when you're trying not to die, you still need to do it politely. There were rules in the arena. Some formal. Others, just traditions. You weren't supposed to stab a man in the back. You didn't attack someone while they were arming. And when your opponent dropped their weapon, there was a brief beat, just a breath where mercy could be shown. Sometimes it was, sometimes not. And when the end came, you bowed, even in death. Posture mattered. Instructors often trained fighters to die well. That meant clean, dramatic, and facing the audience. You don't flop like a fish. You collapse with dignity. Blade still in hand. Chest out. Eyes open. Theatrics weren't optional. They were part of the job description. It all feels surreal. You're watching men prepare for combat knowing full well that even their deaths must be performative. Like dancers rehearsing their final pirouette, you sit back, close your eyes, and let the sounds of the training yard wash over you. The scrape of metal, the bark of commands, the muffled thud of someone hitting the dirt. It's rhythmic, almost meditative. Then someone yells, "Heads up!" and a wooden shield skids across the yard and lands an inch from your foot. You blink and look up as the scarred man from earlier grins. Could have been worse, he says. Sometimes it's the sword that flies. Ho, you believe him. Before you leave, you glance back one more time. The fighters have lined up. The instructor walks down the row, checking stances, adjusting posture. And for a moment, it's not grim at all. It's graceful. You return to your seat with a head full of dust and bruised admiration for the men training down in the ludus. But as the crowd roars again, do you realize today's next performance isn't about human fighters at all? No clanking armor. No duels of honor or clever tactics. What comes next is something far more chaotic and, somehow, even more unfair. Beast hunts. You brace yourself as the wooden trapdoors creak open in the arena floor. Out of the dark tunnels beneath the Colosseum rises a platform, and on it, a bear. Not the cuddly kind either. A hulking. Confused. Utterly out-of-place animal blinking into the sunlight. Paws twitching. Jaws slightly open. It lumbers forward, sniffs the air, and growls just once before the crowd begins to shout. Then a man enters from the opposite gate. He's wiry, sunburned, wearing a patched leather tunic and holding a long spear that looks like it was made by someone who's never actually met a bear. His eyes dart to the stands, then back to the creature pacing toward him. You're not a professional fight analyst or anything. But this is clearly not going to end well. And that's the point. These Matcheskald Venationes weren't contests. They were orchestrated dramas designed to showcase Roman power over nature. Lions, leopards, elephants, crocodiles, ostriches, yes, ostriches, all dragged into the empire from the corners of the known world just to prove Rome could dominate them and laugh while doing it. You'd be amazed how expensive it is to import a rhinoceros across the sea. Or maybe horrified. Either way, you'd also be impressed by the dedication to turning logistics into blood sport. Historians still argue how many animals died in the Colosseum's long run. Some say thousands. Others say hundreds of thousands. The most extreme estimate suggests that over the centuries, Rome wiped out entire species in North Africa just to keep the games fresh. And here you are, watching a single terrified bear stumble across the arena. Unaware, it's part of that long, brutal legacy. The hunter lunges. The bear rears. You almost look away. Almost, but the crowd doesn't. They cheer. They jeer. They place bets. And when the spear breaks, they laugh. Turns out, Roman audiences loved watching things go wrong, especially when they weren't the ones at risk. The best venators were the ones who could stretch out the match, duck under paws, Leap over gaping jaws. Not kill quickly, but keep it going. Suffering was the show. Endurance was applause-worthy. You notice a vendor passing by with roasted chickpeas and dried dates. The smell's nice, but your stomach curls a bit. Eating snacks while watching a live bear swat someone across the face just feels off. But for the Roman crowd, it was a normal day. Games could last from dawn until dusk. With food handed out by attendants and wine sold by boys, barely tall enough to see the arena floor. One hand tossed meat to the people, the other spilled it in the sand, back in the arena. A second trapdoor opens. A leopard this time. Sleek. Fast. Furious. It bounds into the space. Wild eyes scanning for escape. But there is none. Instead, pace. Tail flicking. And you wonder how long it took to capture this animal. How many ships it crossed on. How many handlers didn't make it. All for a 5-minute cameo in someone else's story. A new venator enters. He's clearly more experienced, confident posture. Cleaner armor. A net slung over one shoulder. The crowd knows him. They chant a name. Rhythmic and sharp. You think it's Marcellus. Though you're distracted by the leopard hissing at the platform edge. Marcellus makes it entertaining. He fakes left. Spins right. Lunges and rolls. He's not trying to kill it quickly. He's trying to look good. And it works. The crowd loves him. It draws blood. Then more. Then finally, when the beast is weakening, he raises his gladius and delivers the final strike knot with anger. But ceremony. Like he's lighting a torch at the Olympics. You can't help but flinch anyway. The workers come out to clean again. They drag the body off stage. Rake. Sprinkle fresh sand. Reset. It's astonishing how easily everyone resets. Then the elephant arrives. You don't even see it at first. Just the tremble of the ground. Then the gate creaks wider. And there it is towering. Confused. With wide ears twitching, and a rope wound around one leg like someone thought that would help. The crowd gasps. Then falls into an awed silence. There's no hunter this time. Just a pedestal, with a few flaming torches, and a handler waving palm fronds like a magician in a very risky mood. This isn't a hunt. It's a display. A flex. The elephant is meant to dance. And it does. Badly, it lifts a foot, turns in a shaky circle, then lets out a sound low. Pained. Not the trumpet of joy you were hoping for. And the audience claps like it's clever. Not cruel. Historians still argue whether elephants were used more for mock parades or deadly matches. Some records suggest entire herds were executed for entertainment lined up. Speared. To burned. Others imply they were reserved for imperial wow factor. Kept alive as exotic mascots of conquest. Either way, they didn't belong here. You look around. Some people are watching. Some are napping. One man is trying to peel fruit with a dagger. That's probably not legal. You sit back, exhale slowly, and wonder how long the show will go on. The air shifts as the next round of games begins, not with cheers, but with an uneasy quiet. Like even the rowdiest members of the crowd aren't quite sure whether to laugh, yell, or just fidget awkwardly. You glance toward the emperor's box. He hasn't moved. but the guards around him are suddenly alert. The arena floor is empty for a moment. Too empty. And then you see them. 3 men are pushed into the sand from opposite gates, no weapons. No armor. Just loose tunics, and a look in their eyes that says they've already guessed how this ends. They are not gladiators. They are not hunters. They are criminals. Or prisoners. Or simply unlucky souls, marked for public execution, and their deaths are scheduled to coincide with lunch. You'd think people wouldn't want to eat while watching someone die. But Roman culture was excellent at compartmentalization. Morning fights were for sport. Afternoons were for spectacle. And somewhere in the middle, a casual execution or two. It filled the time, sharpened the appetite, and reminded the audience that Rome didn't just punish wrongdoers, it performed them. A door opens. A prop-stuffed cart is wheeled out, clumsily arranged to resemble a forest, or a cave, or a temple. The sets were usually laughable, made of painted wood and old cloaks. But no one cared about realism. This wasn't a drama. It was a demonstration. The condemned men were sometimes costumed too dressed, as mythical figures or characters from obscure legends. If you're wondering why, here's the Roman logic. If someone had to die anyway, why not make it a story today? It seems the theme is Orpheus. One man is handed a lyre. The crowd chuckles. Another wears a stag's head. The third is tied to a fake tree. Then the lions come out, 2 of them, muscles rippling under patchy fur, ribs showing, jaws wide with that telltale yawn of big cats, just seconds before they pounce. The crowd leans forward, not in horror, but anticipation. Even small children rise onto tiptoes to get a better look. The man with the lyre starts playing, poorly. It's unclear whether he was chosen because he could play or because he couldn't. Either way, the lions are not impressed. They sniff, circle, and then, in a blur, one charges. The lyre skitters across the arena floor, strings twanging off key as it bounces. The audience erupts into laughter. And yes, laughter. Because this isn't just death. This is theater. Historians still argue whether every execution was staged like this, or if some days were more straightforward. The records are vague, blending satire with cruelty. Some accounts describe elaborate reenactments of myths where a man playing Hercules is burned alive to mirror the hero's fiery death. Others mention Daedalus being pushed from a tower with wax wings. Pudic. If grotesque, you shift uncomfortably. It's not the gore that gets you, it's the absurdity. The sheer silliness of dressing someone up as a mythological figure just to tear them apart. But the Romans? They believed in order, in symbolism, in punishment that taught lessons. The Colosseum wasn't merely a place to kill, it was where society reaffirmed who had power and who did not. And if your role was to entertain through suffering, then you'd better perform with flair. Back in the arena, the lions are done. The handlers shout, wave, and eventually lure them back into their cages with slabs of meat and clanging sticks. A few workers jog out and rake the sand clean again, pushing the broken lyre into a corner like it's a piece of discarded theater scenery. In a way, it is. Next, a man is tied to a stake. You can't tell what crime he committed. Maybe he stole. Maybe he defied a noble. Maybe he just looked like someone who did. But today, he's not a man. He's a prop in a story. Two more men in costume emerge. They're dressed as Roman soldiers, but their helmets are covered in gold paint. And one is clearly drunk. They approach the stake, raise their weapons, and strike. The man doesn't scream. Or maybe you just can't hear it over the crowd. The audience cheers again. You glance around and realize most people aren't watching with horror. They're watching like it's a particularly gripping scene in a favorite play. The reactions are emotional, but not necessarily empathetic. People sigh, gasp, even cry out, but they never look away. And that's the strangest part. This was entertainment. Yes. Some Romans were disgusted. Philosophers wrote about the corrosive effect of watching death for fun. Seneca, for instance, criticized the crowd for cheering more at torture than at the artistry of a good match. But their voices were few and quiet. The noise of the arena drowned out almost everything else. You turn back to the sand as a new man is pushed forward. This one stumbles badly, clearly injured before he even arrived. The crowd groans in annoyance. No one likes a limpet slows the pacing. Someone tosses a fig in protest. The guards tighten their grip on the man's arms and drag him toward a shallow pit filled with broken stakes and oil. It's not a trap. It's a warning. You don't need to know his crime, just that it ends here. There's no myth this time. No costume. Just the pit and the inevitable. You watch as the execution plays out. Then the trapdoors close. The rakes smooth the sand. And the crowd reaches for their wine again. Ready for the next act. You barely have time to let the horror settle before something shifts again in the atmosphere. Something almost absurd. A scent. Maybe? The tang of salt water? No. That can't be right. You're in the middle of a stone colossus built for stabbing. Not swimming. But then the wooden trapdoors creak again. Slowly. And from beneath the arena floor, water begins to rise. At first it's a trickle, then a gurgling rush. It pours in from hidden channels, flooding the sand until it darkens. Sleepless. And vanishes beneath the rising pool. The crowd buzzes like bees in a wine barrel. A child shrieks in delight. You squint, still trying to understand what's happening. You're about to witness one of Rome's strangest flexes, a staged Namak naval battles held right inside the Colosseum. Because what's the point of being the most powerful empire on Earth if you can't stage a miniature war between fake ships in your city's most famous murder arena? It's every bit as ridiculous as it sounds. Down below, slaves and workers scramble to drag in propstony galleys on wheels. Cut-down versions of triremes, with oars carved for show rather than steering. The logistics are baffling. Historians still argue how they managed to waterproof the floor, flood the space quickly enough, and not collapse the entire substructure. Some say the Colosseum could only handle these mock sea battles in its earliest days, before underground tunnels made flooding impossible. Others think it was never truly deep enough for a proper naval fight, and that the whole thing was more pageant than war. Either way, here you are, watching ships roll into position, water sloshing around their wooden hulls, as painted backdrops are hoisted around the perimeter to make it all look vaguely oceanic. Blue cloth, dolphin flags, a guy in the back pretending to be Poseidon with a badly made trident. You hear a horn, That's the cue. Dozens of men clamber onto the ships. Most are prisoners. Once again, conscripted into this floating parody of war. They're handed blunt spears and wooden shields, told to shout like pirates, and encouraged to act the part. Some try, others just stand still and wait. The battle begins. 2 ships close in on each other. Oars splash in disorganized rhythm. A man shouts something, either a war cry or a complaint about soggy sandals. The ships collide with a dull thud, and the men begin lobbing small javelins across the water. One bounces off a shield. Another lands in the pool and bobs like a sad twig. And yet the crowd goes wild. Rome didn't care about authenticity here. They wanted noise, motion, the illusion of grandeur. These mock naval battles were often based on real historical events, like the Battle of Salamis or mythical clashes from Greek epics. Except in those tales, there weren't painted backdrops and stagehands in togas holding fans. One ship sinks, meaning it tips slightly, and a few men jump into the shallow water, flailing dramatically. The crowd howls with laughter. It's pantomime, not peril. But once again, the line blurs. You hear a scream that doesn't sound fake. One of the men hasn't come up. The others shout. A handler runs forward. The emperor doesn't move. Eventually, the water ripples, and the man surfaces, coughing, alive. Barely, but shaken. They give him no time to recover. He's handed a flag and told to wave it in surrender. The show must go on. Some scholars believe that early naumachii were much more violent, that prisoners were forced to fight to the death on real boats in massive flooded basins elsewhere in Rome. Julius Caesar staged one in an artificial lake with thousands of combatants. Claudius once built a full-scale naval arena just for a single event. By comparison, what you're seeing now is a watered-down shadow of those spectacles, more symbolic than savage. Still, it's impressive and surreal. By midday, the water has turned murky, tinged with dust, sweat, and other things you try not to think about. The crowd begins to lose interest. Vendors start moving again. Someone next to you is peeling dates with a small knife and offering some around. You decline, still queasy from watching someone nearly drown in a costume made of glued feathers. Then comes the finale. The biggest ship, dubbed Neptune's Hammer, according to the banner rolls in, decked out with horns, painted waves, and way too much purple fabric. Atop, it stands a single man dressed like a sea god, holding a trident with exaggerated flair. You've seen him before? It's Marcellus, the famous Venator from earlier. Now, moonlighting as the hero of this soggy drama, he waves to the crowd, then leaps onto the waterlogged stage below. A final duel unfolds: Marcellus versus the last pirate, who looks like he just wants to go home and dry off. They circle, splash, clash, pose dramatically. Then Marcellus knocks the man into the water with a swing that's more ballet than brutality. Victory. A fanfare blares. The audience stands. Garlands are tossed. One woman hurls a small bouquet. Marcellus bows low, then vanishes through a side gate, probably off to wring out his socks. Workers begin draining the arena using an intricate network of sluices and pipes. The water lowers. The fake ships are dragged off. and within an hour, the sand is dry again. You wouldn't even know a naval battle just happened, except for the faint, wet footprint near your seat. You lean back and wonder what tomorrow's spectacle will be. The sun slips westward now, casting long shadows across the arena floor. But the energy hasn't faded, not even close. The games aren't over until the Emperor has nodded for the last body to be hauled off or spared. You shift your weight on the marble bench. Again, your backside has long since gone numb. The hush that settles over the crowd pulls your attention back like a magnet. Another horn sounds. Not the raucous blast used for beasts or ship battles. This one is deliberate, measured, dramatic. The crowd knows what's coming. Out from the shadows near the Emperor's podium walks a man in brilliant armor, gold-trimmed, plumed helmet, scarlet sash. Not a gladiator, not a fighter, a judge, or more specifically, the editor of the games, the one who controls the outcomes. He strides to the edge of the platform, raises a hand, and the crowd falls silent, because now comes the part people love most, the moment someone's fate hangs on the flick of a finger. You hear whispers. The thumb. Watch his hand. Hope he's not cranky today. Oh, Hollywood's made it look simple: thumbs up for mercy, thumbs down for death. But the reality was murkier than that. Historians still argue what the thumb gestures actually meant. Some believe a turned thumb either up or down symbolized a sword thrust, meaning death. Others argue a hidden thumb, tucked into a fist, meant sheathing the sword and sparing the loser. The truth is probably somewhere in between, and more dependent on mood than strict rule. Because, when you get down to it, the thumb wasn't just about rules. It was about power. The Emperor didn't have to explain his gesture. He could raise a thumb, tilt a hand, or even raise an eyebrow, and a man's life would change forever. Sometimes the crowd influenced him, cheering for mercy, booing for blood. Sometimes they were ignored completely. Depends on the Emperor. Really. Some were generous. Others were bored. A few just liked watching people squirm. The arena gates open again. One fighter enters limping. His helmet is dented. His leg is slick with blood. But he's alive. Behind him, another is dragged barely conscious. A dark smear, trailing behind. He's not dead. But he's not getting up either. The first fighter looks to the Emperor. The crowd leans in. He raised 2 fingers, Misio. The formal appeal for mercy. Now, all eyes turn upward. The Emperor shifts slightly in his seat. The judge waits for the signal. A hand rises, hovers, turns, sideways. The crowd gasps. Not death. Not yet. The fallen man will live if he survives the night. You exhale slowly. So does everyone else. Even the first fighter sags in relief. The crowd claps. But not loudly. This wasn't triumph. It was reprieve. Sometimes mercy was granted because the loser fought bravely. Other times, it was because the crowd found them entertaining, or pitiful, or strangely charismatic. There was no official rubric, just vibes, but not everyone got that luxury. Enter a new pair. They're clearly not evenly matched. One is younger, leaner, better armored. The other older, sweat-drenched, and carrying a blade that looks half the size of his opponent's. The crowd mutters. Someone laughs. Unfair fights were common, even expected. They made for better theater. They circle, clash. The older man gets in a lucky hit, glances, a blow off the younger fighter's shield. It earns a moment of cheer, then a reversal. The younger one drops him with a sweep of the leg. It's fast. Too fast. The old man scrambles on all fours, trying to raise his blade. But his opponent kicks it away. The crowd starts chanting not words, but a long rising, that builds as the younger man raises his gladius. The older man does what he's supposed to. He raised 2 fingers, a plea. The crowd is undecided. Some clap. Some hiss. Some call out names. You can't repeat here. The judge looks to the emperor. This time, there's no hesitation. A flick of the wrist. Thumb, down, up. You're not sure. But the younger man sees it clearly. The blade drops. And just like that, another name disappears into the dust. The workers appear almost instantly. Their movements are rehearsed. One drags the body. Another sprinkles sand to soak up the blood. A third resets the weapons in the center of the ring like it's just another Tuesday afternoon. You watch silently. Something heavy presses on your chest. Not shock. Not sadness. Just fatigue. Emotional. Moral. Historical fatigue. Because the longer you watch, the more you realize this place wasn't just about swords and lions and cheering crowds. It was about spectacle, control, message. The arena was where the emperor reminded the people that he held power over life and death, that he could give mercy or take it away, that he could make them laugh, scream, cry, or kneel. All with a single gesture. You stand slowly. Legs stiff. The sun is lower now, painting the arena in long streaks of orange and crimson. You glance one more time toward the emperor's box. He's already gone. No announcement. No farewell. Just vanished, like a magician after the final act. The crowd starts to disperse. You hear snippets of conversation. Did you see that last one? I thought he had him. That thumb thing still confuses me. You walk out with them. Down the same stone ramps, trod by millions before you. The walls are scratched with graffitism names. Some vulgar symbols. Some tiny thumbs carved into marble, as if someone long ago was still debating which direction meant what. You reach the outer gate. Step into the evening air, and wonder whether tomorrow's games will be kinder, or crueler, or just more confusing. You wake up the next day, in a haze of dust and memory. The Colosseum rises again with the sun, casting a shadow over the city like it's always been there, and always will be just another monument to pain and politics, disguised as culture. You shuffle toward it with the others, drawn not by bloodlust exactly, but by a weird, undeniable curiosity. It's like a volcano that erupts on schedule. You can't not watch. Today's energy feels different. Though, there's a buzz whispers racing through the crowd like wildfire. New recruits. Fresh meat. Slaves from Dacia. You catch fragments of languages. Laughter. and something about a beast no one's ever seen before. You hope that last one's just a rumor. Rome loves to exaggerate. You squeeze through the gates and climb to your usual perch. The arena below is already prepared. Sand raked, traps set, shade cloth pulled halfway across the sky like a lazy sail. Then the gate clangs open again. And out they come, a whole line of them new gladiators. You can tell instantly. They're wide-eyed, nervous, stepping too fast or too slow. The crowd watches like a pack of wolves, eyeing a herd of deer. Every shuffle is judged. Every bead of sweat is performance. Some wear armor that clearly doesn't fit. Others are practically naked, save for a loincloth and a short blade. One man carries a wooden staff with shaking hands, as if he's hoping to swap violence for interpretive dance at the last second. These aren't the seasoned veterans. These are the untried, the unwanted, the expendable. And the crowd loves it. You hear chants, names you don't recognize, probably made up on the spot nicknames that'll either stick or be forgotten by sundown. Twig legs, mouth breather. One woman yells, "Go!" Sticky, at a confused man who looks like he's considering a career change, assuming he survives the hour. The match begins, if you can call it that. It's more of a chaotic scramble. The fighters don't know the rhythm yet. No pacing. No flair. One swings too early. Another freezes. Two of them somehow stab each other at the exact same time and just collapse in a stunned heap. The crowd howls. This is what the Romans called a tiro fighta match between new gladiators. Often clumsy, sometimes funny, always dangerous. It was the warm-up act for the afternoon bloodbath. But that didn't mean it wasn't deadly. In fact, the mortality rate was often higher among new recruits. No fan base. No skills. No mercy. Historians still debate how long a rookie lasted in the arena. Some say the average lifespan was just 3 fights. Others argue it varied wildly depending on your style, your sponsor, or your ability to not get stabbed in the spleen. What's certain is that the first match was the most terrifying and the most revealing. You watch as one of the new recruits, an older man, possibly a former soldier, manages to hold his ground. His footwork's clumsy, but his eyes stay sharp. He ducks, jabs, parries. The crowd notices. Murmurs ripple through the stands. Hope forms. Just a sliver. Just enough. Then someone throws a rock. It hits the wrong guy. That rock light. Stupid. Tossed by a drunk or a bored, teen tips the match. One fighter flinches. Another lunges. And in the chaos, the promising older man gets caught underfoot. You wince. So does the crowd. But they recover quickly. The show must go on. You notice now how the crowd itself behaves like an organism. It surges with energy, turns in unison, screams in waves. They might not remember every name, but they remember how it felt to watch someone flail, fall, bleed. The collective mood turns warm or cruel depending on a single cheer, or a thrown fig. Below, the fight drags on. A few fighters manage to survive. They raise their arms, not in victory, but relief. They'll live another day. Maybe. The crowd throws some bread. A few coins. One guy gets a sandal. You're not sure if that was a gift or an insult. Then the gate opens again. This time it's not fighters. It's trainers. Veterans. Spectacles in their own right. The crowd recognizes them instantly and erupts. These men aren't here to fight. They're here to demonstrate. Like ancient martial arts instructors with a flair for theater, they step into the sand, bow, slightly, and begin a slow, deliberate showcase of moves, swordplay, shield work, disarms, flourishes that sparkle under the sun. One even reenacts a dramatic kill slicing the air in a way that makes the crowd swoon. It's all highly rehearsed. And yet, you can't look away. These are the men the rookies hope to become, not just survivors, but artists of blood and movement. A fringe tidbit you once heard flutters into your mind. Some gladiators had their own entrance music. No joke. Trumpet flores. Personalized chants. Like a Roman WWE. The trainers exit to cheers. And you see the recruits again. Now lined up at the edge of the arena, watching with a cocktail of awe and panic. One of them tries to mimic the trainer's flourish and nearly trips over his own foot. The others laugh nervously. Some look sick. One looks asleep with his eyes open. They'll be back. Maybe not all of them, but some. The crowd will watch. Will cheer. Will remember the winners for a week and forget the losers by dinner. You sit there, wondering who in that line will still be breathing next month, and who, if anyone, will get a name worth chanting. The midday sun hangs directly overhead now, casting hard light that makes the blood on the sand glisten like spilled wine. You squint down at the arena floor, which looks deceptively calm, flattened again by rakes. Cleared of bodies, reset for the next spectacle. But the real chaos isn't here. It's beneath your feet, literally. You make your way down through a side passage, away from the roar of the crowd, toward the labyrinth. Below the Colosseum, known as the Hypogeum, two-level network of tunnels, cages, trapdoors, and mechanical lifts hidden under the arena floor. The place smells like damp stone and animal musk. Torches flicker on the walls, casting long, nervous shadows. This is where the Magicor madness really happened. You duck past a low beam and suddenly find yourself in the middle of controlled chaos. Men run back and forth, cranking winches, adjusting pulleys, feeding lions through narrow chutes, like they're stocking a very unfortunate vending machine. The animals pace in tiny enclosures, their roars muted but constant. You pass a leopard, licking its paw behind rusted bars. A bear grunting softly. A crocodile, just lying there. Eyes half closed like it gave up 3 days ago. You sidestep a rat the size of a loaf of bread. No one notices you. Everyone's too busy keeping the illusion above intact. That's what the Hypogeum was, the guts of the Colosseum, the behind-the-scenes engine that powered the show. Here, workers triggered trapdoors, sent fighters up on hidden lifts, and prepared exotic animals for dramatic surprise appearances. 1 minute, a gladiator's standing alone. The next, the floor opens, and a lion leaps out. The audience screams. But below, a dozen men just pulled ropes in perfect sync to make that moment happen. Historians still marvel at the engineering. The hypogeum had more than 30 elevators, all manually powered, each able to raise cages, scenery, or people into the arena. The machinery was operated by hundreds of slavesmen, who often had no idea what or who they were lifting. Just orders. Platform 12. Raise now. Sometimes it was a deer, sometimes a prisoner, sometimes a wooden ship filled with painted fish on wheels. Surprise. You watch one team loading props for a mock temple scene. Painted columns, a statue of Mars with an oddly modern-looking beard, and some fake ivy made from dyed horsehair. It's barely held together, but no one above will see the glue and twine. Just the drama. A whisper reaches your ear on worker complaining. Too many today. No more space. Someone else mutters. Stack the bodies tighter. You pretend you didn't hear that. You pass a room where two gladiators wait. One sharpens his sword silently. The other just sits, eyes closed, whispering something you can't make out. A prayer. Maybe. Or just names. Maybe his own. In another corridor, a group of prisoners huddle in silence. Some are dressed in animal skins, probably for a mythical execution. One wears a fake wolf head. Another has wings strapped to his arms with twine and wax. Daedalus. Perhaps. You almost laugh. Then stop yourself. You reach the corner where the elevator mechanism for Gate 7 is being primed. 3 men heave on a rope while a fourth pours water into a groaning gearbox. The wooden platform jerks, then rises an inch. That's all they need. At the signal, they'll unleash it, and whoever or whatever's on top will be catapulted into the light, like a sacrifice hurled toward the gods. Somewhere in this maze, a musician plays a reed flute. The sound is eerie haunting, in a space meant for screams. You pause by a side chamber, where a scribbled wall carving catches your eye, a stick figure with a sword. Arms raised in victory. Beside it, a smaller figure with X's for eyes. Crude, but accurate. You step back as a group of handlers pushes a rolling cage toward the lift. Inside it, a boar snorts and stamps. The man steering it curses in Latin, then mutters something about how, last time, it got loose and bit someone important. Even down here, reputations exist, and pseudo-mistakes. A fringe story comes to mend an old tale about an elephant that refused to kill during a match. It just stood there, mournful, confused. The crowd booed, but the handlers, furious, beat it until it turned violent. Then the crowd cheered again. Scholars debate whether that story's real or myth. But down here, with all the machinery and masks, the difference starts to blur. Eventually, you make your way back up. The staircase winds past storage rooms, filled with weapons blunted for trainees, sharpened for drama. There's even a shelf of helmets designed to break easily for flair. Not safety, just spectacle. You reach the arena floor again, just as the next match begins. The crowd roars. But your ears are still full of the creak of rope and the clank of pulleys, of whispered prayers, of wet stone. You glance behind you, toward the dark opening that leads back down. And for the first time, the arena doesn't feel like the main act. It feels like the mask. The real show, you now know, happens below unseen, unsung, and impossibly grim. The air feels hotter than usual today, heavy with dust and the burnt scent of spilled wine baking in the midday sun. Your tunic sticks to your back. You shift on the stone bench, but it's no use. Comfort doesn't exist in the Colosseum. Not when the next act is one of the most anticipated kinds, mismatched combat. The term doesn't quite capture the horror. The gates creak open. Slowly, deliberately, two figures emerge. One is massive, 6.5 feet tall, if he's an inch. Broad-shouldered, armed to the teeth with a scutum shield and a gladius. His bronze helmet, shaped like a snarling wolf. The crowd knows him. They chant his name, Baro, Baro, Baro. He raises one arm in acknowledgement, the other still clutching his weapon. He's been here before. The other man? Well, let's just say he doesn't get a chant. He's thin, nervous. His armor is mostly leather. His helmet slightly crooked. He carries a trident, probably not by choice, and a net that's too short to matter. His style is retiarius, the least armored type of gladiator, meant to fight with agility and range, against someone like Baro. It's the equivalent of bringing a mop to a sword fight. The crowd knows it. And they love it. You realize, with a cold twinge, that they're not cheering for a fair match. They're cheering for a slaughter. Historians still argue whether these kinds of matches were common or rare. But examples show up in mosaics, graffiti, and written records. Sometimes they were used as punishment. Send a disobedient gladiator into the ring with a much stronger opponent and let the lesson soak into the sand. Other times, they were just popular. There's something about watching the underdog suffer that scratches a dark itch for the crowd. The fight begins. Baro doesn't rush. He doesn't need to. He stalks forward, shield raised. The retiarius dances to the side, throwing his net. It tangles barely and slips off Baro's shoulder. The crowd hoots. It's a weak start. The retiarius circles again, jabbing with his trident. You want to root for him. You want him to pull off some miracle. But Baro is too experienced, too calm. He waits, wets, then lunges. The first blow knocks the trident from the man's hands. The second sends him sprawling. The third, well, that one doesn't come yet. Baro steps back, letting the crowd drink in the image. On him and sprout, gasping. The other standing tall, untouched. He looks to the emperor's box, a question in his stance. The crowd begins chanting again. Not a name this time, but a word. Ugula. Kill him. You sit still. Frozen. You're not sure if you're hoping for mercy or just watching out of morbid habit. The retiarius lifts his head. He doesn't raise two fingers. He knows it won't matter. The emperor gives no signal. Baro finishes the fight. There's applause. Of course. Bread is tossed. Wine sloshed. Cheers. Ring out. But something else stirs in the arena now. Attention. A sense that the line between entertainment and cruelty has blurred, then been erased entirely. You think about the concept of fairness, how the Romans had a deep love for rules and rituals, but only when it suited them. The truth? Fairness wasn't a goal. It was an illusion. The games weren't balanced to test skill. They were tilted. Loaded dice, rolled with a smile. Designed to reinforce who had power and who didn't. Sometimes, the matchups were symbolic. Imagine a wealthy citizen who angered a senator. Suddenly, he's in the arena, facing two trained fighters, dressed as a mythological villain. The odds are 0. The message is loud. Don't cross the wrong man. There's a fringe tale you once heard about a blindfolded gladiator, forced to fight 3 men at once. No one knows if it's true, but it wouldn't be surprising. Rome loved pushing spectacle into absurdity. And yet, occasionally, the unexpected happened. You've heard of matches where the weaker fighter won, where a ready Arius danced circles around his armored opponent and brought him down with a single, lucky yab. Those were the stories that stuck. The ones people told in taverns with sloshed wine and wide eyes. The ones that gave hope to the next poor soul, drafted into the sand. Barrow leaves the arena, blood-spattered and proud. He's not a villain here. He played his part. Maybe he even hated it. But in this world, hesitation is weakness. The next match is already being prepared. A dwarf enters the Arenahe's armor, custom-made. Painted bright gold. More costume than protection. The crowd cheers like it's a joke. Across from him, a young woman in a breastplate too large, holding a spear that drags behind her. She was likely a prisoner. Maybe not even trained. This is no duel. It's theater of the cruelest kind, and the Romans call it art. You've seen a lot already, but nothing quite prepares you for the sound that comes next. It's not a cheer. It's not a scream. It's laughter raucous, almost childlike, and it rolls across the stands like a gust of warm wind. You glance back at the arena floor and realize why. The match has begun. The dwarf in gold armor waves a tiny wooden sword above his head, trotting in exaggerated circles as the woman chases him with a spear twice her height. It's ridiculous. Deliberately. The crowd hoots and claps. Someone throws a wreath. Someone else throws a loaf of bread. Neither fighter catches them. They just keep spinning. Like a theater troupe, acting out a myth written by a drunk. This is comic combata real category in the Colosseum's long, blood-stained repertoire. It wasn't always killing. Sometimes it was farce. Mock battles. Slapstick routines dressed in the language of war. Gladiators weren't just warriors. They were performers. And sometimes, the audience didn't want blood. They wanted a punchline. You watch as the woman fumbles her spear and nearly drops it. The dwarf seizes the moment, runs behind her, and smacks her lightly on the back with his toy sword. The crowd erupts. You can hear people yelling, "Again, again," like this is a circus. But here's where the laughter fades. The woman stumbles forward, falls to her knees, and doesn't get back up. The dwarf freezes. The crowd murmurs. You can see confusion in his stance. He wasn't trained for this part. He wasn't supposed to win. Not like this. A man in a tunic runs into the arena, some kind of assistant or stagehand, and checks on her. Then he stands, gives a thumbs up to the stands, and mouths something you can't quite catch. She's okay, sort of. The match is declared a draw. The dwarf bows. The woman is helped off the sand. The crowd claps again. But it's thinner now. Less enthusiastic. They got their comedy. But only just. You sit back, thinking about the line between humor and humiliation. In Roman times, that line was basically non-existent. Mock fights often involved andibatai, gladiators who wore helmets with no eye holes. Yes, you heard that right, blindfolded gladiators, swinging wildly at each other, while the crowd roared with laughter. Historians still argue if this was a punishment, a novelty act, or both. Some claim these matches were sanctioned ways to let off steam without all the messy corpse cleanup. Others say they were used to mock the idea of combat itself, to remind people that Rome could turn even violence into a joke. You hear a trumpet flourish, and the next act begins. This time, 2 men enter dressed as centaurs. Well, dressed is generous. They wear horse costumes from the waist, down wooden frames covered in brown cloth. With crudely painted tails, each man holds a bow. Their armor is sculpted to show exaggerated muscles. Almost cartoonishly heroic, they gallop in slow motion. The crowd giggles. You can't help but smile a little. Not because it's funny, but because it's so weird. This is what passed for high-concept humor in ancient Rome mythology as parody. Battle turned into burlesque. They fire arrows, wooden sticks with cloth tips. One man pretends to be hit, stumbles backward in a dramatic death spiral, and lands face down in the sand. The other raises his arms in triumph. Then a lion enters. It's not part of the skit. You see it before they do. Slipping through a side gate, someone forgot to close. It moves slowly. Confused. Nose twitching. The centaur winner turns. Sees it. Freezes. The crowd goes from laughter to tension in a heartbeat. Handlers appear with poles and meat. The lion snarls once. The man in the costume rips off his fake horse body and sprints for the nearest wall. It's honestly impressive. The lion is contained, barely, led away with a fresh slab of goat and a lot of yelling. The skit ends. The illusion is shattered. But the crowd? They love it even more. Real danger makes for better comedy. You're starting to notice a pattern. The Colosseum didn't just deliver violence. It delivered variety. It was a buffet of spectacle. Sometimes elegant duel. Sometimes mythological drama. Sometimes absurd pantomimes. Each designed to keep the audience engaged, entertained, and emotionally ping-ponging between horror, awe, and laughter. There's even a story half-legend, half-drunken invention about a man who brought performing pigs to the Colosseum. They danced. They rolled over. One even played a small pipe with its snout. The crowd lost their minds. Until someone asked, what would happen if the pigs refused to perform? You don't want to know the answer. Now, in the arena, a new act begins. A man walks in, alone, juggling 3 swords. Behind him, another man leads a bear on a chain. They begin to dance together. The bear is clearly drugged. The juggler keeps dropping swords. The crowd claps anyway. You can't tell if it's funny or tragic. Probably both. A child near you asks his father why the bear looks tired. The father doesn't answer. You leave your seat for a moment. Not because you can't stomach it, But because you need air, you push through the crowd, down a side staircase, and out into the ring of archways that circle the Colosseum's outer wall. You stand there in the shade, looking back at the structure itself. It's beautiful, grand, monumental, and also a monument to absurd cruelty. Because while Rome could write poetry, build aqueducts, and map the stars, it could also make a joke out of suffering. You take one more breath and walk back to your seat. Because the next act is starting, and you're not sure if it'll be a duel, a dance, or a disaster. The afternoon light slants low, turning the Colosseum's walls a honeyed gold. But nothing inside feels sweet. You're back in your seat, slightly sunburned, a little dehydrated, and definitely unsure of what comes next. That's sort of the point. The Roman games didn't thrive on predictability. They were a spinning wheel of absurdity and blood. Now it's time for something the crowd takes very seriously. Duels between different fighting styles, not for laughs, not for justice, for technique. A murmillo enters first broad. Heavy, shield forward, helmet gleaming. He looks like a walking battering ram. His style is built for power, endurance, and brute force bashing. Thick greaves guard his legs. His sword is short, ideal for stabbing once he closes distance. This guy could shoulder through a stone wall if he had enough momentum. The gate on the opposite side opens. Out walks a thrakeslider. Quicker, curved blade flashing like a fish in water. His helmet's plume bobs with every step. His shield is small, crescent-shaped, built for speed and deflection. He carries a sikka, a short, curved sword, perfect for striking around a murmillo's bulky defenses. It's David and Goliath. Except David has shin guards and a dramatic strut. The crowd leans in. This is the stuff they came to see. The clash begins. At first, it's tentative. A few test strikes. The murmillo shuffles forward like a tank. The thrakes dances to the side, kicks up a bit of dust, and lashes out. The blade scrapes armor, but doesn't bite. The murmillo grunts. The thrakes grins. The dance speeds up. It's a real fight. But it's also an audition. The best gladiators weren't just skilled, they were theatrical. The arena was the only place where performance could be more important than outcome. A well-fought draw earned more glory than a clumsy win. And these two? They know it. A flurry of strikes from the thrakes. Then a powerful shield slam from the murmillo. The crowd oohs as the thrake stumbles, rolls, and comes up swinging again. Someone throws a handful of petals. It's unclear whether that's encouragement or just a bored noble trying to spice things up. Historians still argue how often these fights were to the death. Some records suggest many ended when one fighter yielded, especially if both were skilled and beloved. The crowd had a say. So did the editor of the games. And so, of course, did the emperor, but the gladiators themselves had pride, reputation. Some would rather die spectacularly than yield meekly. There's a quirky piece of trivia you remember. Some gladiators became so famous they had merch. Seriously. Lamps. Oil flasks. Ava graffiti. One guy named Celadus was called the heartthrob of the girls. Another, Flamma, reportedly won the rudest wooden sword of freedom multiple times, and kept returning to the arena anyway. Maybe for money. Maybe for glory. Maybe because, out there on the sand, he mattered. Back in the fight, the Murmillo finally lands a solid hit. The Thrake staggers, blood blooming through his tunic. He falters, kneels. But he doesn't raise 2 fingers. Not yet. He lunges own final swing. The Murmillo blocks it cleanly, then steps forward and places his blade at the Thrake's throat. The crowd holds its breath, not for the outcome, for the signal, and it comes. The judge raises his hand, flat. Palm out. Mercy. The Murmillo steps back. The crowd cheers. The Thrake's is helped to his feet, still bleeding, but grinning, like he just won. In a way, it did. The fight was good. The show was better. Both men lived to duel another day. It's one of the rare moments when everything feels almost balanced. You can feel the shift in mood. The laughter from earlier has softened into admiration. A few people wipe their eyes, not because they're sad, but because the sand and sweat and sunlight sting, and maybe, just maybe, because they felt something. Then, the next match is announced, and the feeling passes. This time, the pairing is more unusual. A Dimakarusa fighter with 2 swords versus a heavily armored Secutor. The crowd loves these mismatches. Not unfair, necessarily, but unpredictable. The Secutor, with his smooth helmet and thick armor, is hard to wound, but slow. The Dimakaris is like a hummingbird with blades. He spins. He weaves. He slashes from both sides. The fight is fast and frantic. One sword glances off armor, while the other aims low. The Secutor grunts, blocks, counters, but he's tiring. You can see it. His breath comes heavy. His knees wobble just slightly. The Dimakaris presses the advantage. He slashes, spins, a final strike, and the Secutor falls. But this time, no plea for mercy, no thumb signal. Just silence. The crowd has seen enough. And the body is carried off. You sit back. The sun dipping behind the upper arches now. Long shadows stretch across the sand. The arena smells of dust, sweat, and iron. You've watched men fight for their lives. You've seen mercy. You've seen brutality. And somehow, through it all, what lingers is not the violence. It's the rhythm, the structure, the strange, brutal ballet that Rome perfected like no other. The warmth of the day begins to fade. But the Colosseum is far from empty. The evening games are something else entirely. Less theatrical. Less sports-like. This is the time when Rome's appetite for punishment and propaganda takes center stage. A hush falls over the crowd, as a group of figures is led into the arena. Not gladiators. Not soldiers. These are prisoners soon armed. Unarmored. Eyes downcast. Some are dressed in rags. Others in strange costumes meant to symbolize their supposed crimes. One man wears a wolf mask. Another, a set of crude angel wings. Their hands are bound. Their feet shuffle slowly across the sand like they've already given up. You notice that the mood in the crowd has shifted. There's no cheering now. No chants. Just quiet anticipation. These aren't games. These are executions. The Roman appetite for death wasn't limited to combat. In fact, the Colosseum was often used as a public venue for capital punishment, particularly for enemies of the state. Traitors, and those accused of blasphemy or insubordination. But this wasn't a simple beheading behind closed doors. Oh no, this was drama. Dressed in myth. Spiced with cruelty. And staged for maximum impact. They called it damnatio, ad bestias condemnation to the beasts. You look to the gates. They open with a slow, metallic groan. Out trots a lion. Then a leopard. Then a bear. Muzzled and pulled by handlers who look as nervous as the crowd feels. The animals are made hungry on purpose. Kept barely fed before the show. Sometimes drugged to make their movements more unpredictable. Sometimes teased or beaten to provoke rage. They aren't hunting for survival. They're attacking for sport against victims who don't stand a chance. One prisoner is chained to a post in the center of the arena. The others are left to stand alone. A horn sounds. The handlers release the animals. The lion bounds forward, suddenly energized. The leopard circles warily. The bear stumbles a bit, it's too hot. And he looks more confused than feral. Still, the effect is chilling. The crowd flinches as the lion lunges. You look away. Most people do. Just for a second, but then they look back. And that's the most Roman thing of all, because this wasn't about justice. It was about spectacle. Punishment, dressed as story. Death turned into lesson. You've read that sometimes these executions were tied to mythology. A prisoner might be dressed as Prometheus and chained while vultures circled overhead. Another might be cast as Orpheus, trying to charm beasts with a fake lyre, only to be torn apart moments later. Historians still argue whether the audiences truly believed these narratives or simply played along. Did they think they were witnessing divine retribution? Or was it just grotesque pageantry? No one knows. But it happened. Again and again. You glance down again. One prisoner still stands. A woman. Young. Her face streaked with dirt. She holds her ground. Even as the bear shambles closer, she doesn't flinch. Doesn't run. The crowd notices. A murmur. Someone yells. Courage. Another yells. Fool. It's hard to tell which one is more sincere. Suddenly, the bear veers off. Distracted by a scent. The handlers rush in. Horns sound again. And the animals are retracted. The woman is spared for now. But others weren't so lucky. You've lost track of how many lay crumpled in the dust. The crowd claps. Hesitantly, then louder. Not for the deaths, but for the drama. The executions end, and the sand is quickly raked again. The stains covered. The chains dragged away. You wonder who cleans the animals. Who calms them? Who prepares them for tomorrow? You wonder if the beasts ever remember the faces. If they dream, there's a story, possibly apocryphal, of a lion that refused to attack a Christian because it recognized him from the time they'd been caged together. The crowd turned on the lion. The man was executed anyway. The lion, too. Rome didn't like disobedience, especially from animals. Now, a new figure enters the arena. He wears a robe. Not armor. Not costume. A priest. One of the haruspice's soothsayers who read omens from entrails and weather patterns. He walks solemnly to the center and makes a small offering at a stone altar just off to the side. It's mostly for show, a ritual gesture to cleanse the space before the final acts of the day, but the mood has changed. You feel it. These weren't games anymore. These were warnings. Obey, or suffer, believe, or perish. Rome didn't need posters or speeches. They had the arena. A single afternoon of well-curated violence could say more about the emperor's priorities than 1,000 coins with his face on them. You lean forward, watching the altar smoke curl into the dusk sky. Some in the crowd begin to leave, their curiosity sated, their thirst for justice, vengeance, or just variety temporarily satisfied. But others stay. You stay because if Rome is going to teach a lesson tonight, you want to know what the next one is. Twilight settles over Rome like a worn velvet curtain, softening the harsh lines of the Colosseum. The shade cloth above you ripples in the breeze, casting flickering patterns across the sand. The day has already delivered chaos, cruelty, and comedy. But the crowd hasn't moved. They're still hungry for blood, for wonder, for whatever twist the arena throws next. You're about to get it. Because now comes one of the most anticipated spectacles in the Roman playbook, the mythological reenactments. This isn't history. It's theater. Except instead of painted backdrops and pretend swords, they use real animals, real fire, real human lives, all in the name of storytelling. The trumpet sounds, the sand has been transformed. Where just an hour ago prisoners begged for mercy, now stands a wooden temple facade, a towering bull statue, and fake trees arranged with the subtlety of a stagehand who's way over budget and way underpaid. The crowd claps at the set like it's a Broadway premiere. The announcer, his voice booming through a horn, proclaims the scene: the death of Dirce. You blink. It takes a moment to place the myth. Dirce, Queen of Thebes, tied to a bull by the sons of Antiope as punishment. In Legend, the bull drags her to death. Here in the Colosseum, it won't be symbolic. A woman is brought out, bound in fine robes, her face streaked with ash to suggest divine judgment. The bull snorts and stamps in a pen at the arena's edge, muscles rippling under patchy fur. It's real, enormous, probably imported from somewhere with better grass and fewer safety regulations. Handlers secure the ropes. The woman doesn't scream, but you can feel her panic radiating through her stillness. Then, without ceremony, Bull is released. It doesn't charge at first. It trots awkwardly. Confused by the rope, the crowd murmurs. The illusion falters for a moment. Then it pulls. The woman stumbles. The rope jerks. The fake trees topple. And suddenly, myth becomes motion. The crowd leans forward, captivated. It's a brutal thing, watching an ancient story come to life with living bodies. You find yourself wondering if this is what the playwrights intended. Probably not. The Greeks liked symbolism. The Romans preferred splatter. Historians still argue how common these live-death myths really were. Some say they were occasional. Others insist they were monthly staples, used to impress foreign visitors or mark imperial birthdays. Most agree on this. If there was a dramatic way to kill someone, Rome had already tried it. A fringe example floats to your mind. An unlucky man once dressed as Icarus, suspended by ropes and wings from the top of the arena. He flew for about 5 seconds before the wax melted, and he plummeted into a pit of spikes. The crowd roared. The symbolism was neat. The death was not back in the sand. The woman has collapsed. The bull is led away. The crowd claps not for her, but for the scene, the idea of it. You realize now that in Rome, narrative was everything. The myth mattered more than the person. They weren't killing Dirce. They were reenacting justice. Even if it required inventing it first, the stage is reset. Next comes a story even darker, the tale of Mucius Scaevola, the Roman youth who, according to legend, proved his loyalty to Rome by thrusting his hand into a fire without flinching. You recall the story, captured by the enemy. He burns his hand to show his resolve. The enemy, impressed, releases him in the arena. The version is simplified. A prisoner is marched in, tied to a post. A brazier of glowing coals is wheeled forward. The actor playing Mucius is forced to place his hand on the iron grating. He tries to be brave, but bravery doesn't stop nerves from screaming, "Hey, Yerks!" He shouts. The crowd cheers. You can almost hear the story retold in taverns that night. He didn't flinch. He barely twitched. I saw smoke from his elbow. But you, sitting there, to know the truth. No one walks away from that smiling. The prisoner is dragged off. The brazier is rolled away. The myth is complete. The set transforms again faster this time. Now, it's the underworld. Black cloth covers the sand. A few skeletal props are scattered like discarded Halloween decorations. A man dressed as Hades emerges, waving a golden trident. He's shirtless. The crowd loves it. 2 figures follow Persephone and Orpheus. A light drizzle begins, rare for Roman summer, and it adds a strange melancholy to the scene. The actor playing Orpheus begins to play a lyre, badly. But it doesn't matter, because halfway through the scene, a trapdoor opens sand, a live snake slithers into the arena. The crowd shrieks, "Orpheus!" Dies, Persephone weeps. Others cackles. It's theater, pure and ridiculous. And yet, somehow, still terrifying. You lean back, exhausted. Your emotions have been yanked back and forth so many times. They feel like frayed rope. You've seen a woman dragged by a bull, a man burn his own hand, and a lyre player eaten by symbolism. And the strangest part? You can't look away, because even in its cruelty, there's something magnetic about Rome's need to turn death into drama. The sun is nearly gone now. The final act approaches, and the crowd knows it. You can feel the pulse of expectation like an empire, exhaling before one last breath. The last light slips away behind the arches, and the arena is lit by torch and fire pit. Shadows flicker along the stone walls like silent spectators. dancing with the hush that's fallen over the crowd. Something is coming. Something big. Everyone feels it, and then you hear it, the rhythmic, deliberate sound of drums. Boom, boom, boom. It's not just music. It's ceremony. The kind Rome reserves for only its grandest, gaudiest acts. Today, that means the naumachia, mock naval battle staged right inside the Colosseum. Yes, a say battle. In a landlocked amphitheater, you raise an eyebrow. You're not sure how this is going to work, but then the floor begins to move. The arena had been cleverly drained earlier. The sand cleared away. Workers crank mechanisms, releasing floodgates hidden beneath the hypogeum. Slowly and possibly, the Colosseum's floor fills with water. Shallow, but enough to float a small boat. You're watching the world's weirdest swimming pool take shape. And it's being done with the confidence of a city that paved entire roads through mountains. Historians still argue whether full-scale naval battles happened in the Colosseum itself or only in earlier arenas, like the one built by Augustus in the Campus Martius. But whatever this is, it's elaborate. The engineering alone is enough to impress you. Ropes, winches, aqueduct-fed cisterns. Rome had a fondness for overkill, and they applied it generously. 2 small galleys are pushed into the newly formed pool. Each is manned by 10 rowers, 2 archers, and a man dressed like Neptune. You are absolutely certain none of these people are sailors. The crowd cheers anyway. The ocean battle begins. One boat veers immediately to the left, clearly miscalculating momentum. The other lurches forward and smacks the wall. An oar snaps. The crowd laughs. This is less of a war and more of a waterborne brawl between 2 groups of soaked, irritated actors. And then, arrows fly, sort of. They're blunted tips, mostly aimed for show. The goal isn't death, it's destruction. Whoever sinks first loses. The 2 boats awkwardly circle each other, their fake sails billowing in the torchlight. One archer falls overboard. The crowd explodes in laughter as he flounders, swearing in what sounds like badly conjugated Latin. Eventually, the galleys collide. One flips halfway. The Neptune actor tumbles into the water. And that's it. The match is over. The crowd loves it. People are crying with laughter. Someone throws a garland. Someone else jumps up and yells, "Mare Nostrum," like it's the funniest thing they've ever said. But while you're laughing too, something else itches at the back of your mind. The ridiculousness. The lengths they go to. All to simulate control. Domination. Empyrean water. On land. In the arena. Rome didn't just want to win wars. They wanted to replay them. To own them. To rehearse them for an audience that could pretend they, too, were conquerors. There's a fringe account of an emperor who had an entire artificial lake dug for a naumachia involving real prisoners, real ships, and hundreds of deaths. Not an exaggeration. Just a line item on the entertainment budget. And they called it Thursday, back in the arena. The boats are towed away. Bits of wood and floating props trailing behind. The water is drained with surprising speed. Slats in the floor creak open, and workers with rakes appear like ants at a picnic, already resetting for the next act. You realize something else now. The logistics are almost as terrifying as the violence. This isn't just a death pit. It's a machine, a schedule, a choreographed engine built to turn suffering into applause. The Emperor appears again, just briefly leaning forward in his box. A gesture is made. A hush follows. Out come the trophies, not made of gold, made of people. The surviving gladiators of the day are marched out, lined up in rows, some still bleeding, others limping, a few grinning like they just got promoted. Because maybe they did. A trumpet blasts. The names of the winners are called real or invented. The crowd chants. Bread is thrown. A laurel wreath is placed on one fighter's head. He raises his arm. More out of habit than pride. You watch as his eyes flicker upward just a second to the imperial box. He wants to see if the Emperor notices him. He doesn't. He's already turned away. The final act is brief but solemn. A single, silent pass of the arena floor. A cart pulled by mules gathers the dead, covered in cloth. Mostly, some not. The workers move fast, efficient. They've done this before. The smell is managed with incense and burning herbs. A priest returns, this time with a bowl of wine and crushed flowers. He sprinkles it over the sand, a symbol, a reset, a washing away. The crowd begins to leave now, filtering out through the arches like sand through an hourglass. Their faces are a mix of flushed awe and gentle boredom, as if they just watched a particularly long play and are now wondering what's for dinner. You remain seated a little longer. The wind carries scraps of laurel and broken petals across the floor. Somewhere below, a lion growls or yawns. You're not sure anymore. The torchlight flickers. The incense smoke swirls. You sit and stare at the sand, at the echo of movement now gone, and, for the first time all day, it's quiet. The crowd thins until the Colosseum feels almost hollow. You stay seated, letting the stone cool beneath you and the night breeze touch your face. It's oddly peaceful, no, if you forget the blood, the roars, and the lingering metallic scent of death. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the silence lasting. But Rome doesn't like silence. Not for long, somewhere beneath the arena. The gears are already turning again. Workers reset pulleys. Slaves scrub the sand. Guards shuffle paperwork, confirming who lived, who died, and who might be entertaining again tomorrow. There's no off switch here. The Colosseum breathes even when it sleeps. You decide to walk, not out of the stadium but around its edge. You pass vendors packing up their carts, children asleep on shoulders, and nobles haggling over where to eat next. The games are over, but the after show has just begun. You find your way down into one of the inner service corridors, a quiet place where whispers hang in the air like dust motes. It's here, oddly, that you find the real stories. Murals scratched into walls. Names etched beside tally marks. One particularly elaborate carving shows a tiny man fighting a lion the size of a house. Clearly optimistic. This is where the gladiators lived. Not forever. Just long enough to learn to die properly. The barracks are cramped, low-ceilinged, dim. Vodenbunks, a handful of tunics drying on ropes, a bench smeared with what might be liniment or maybe old blood, The scent is equal parts sweat, oil, and resignation. A group of men sits near a flickering oil lamp. They're quiet, not sleeping, just waiting. You see bandages, bruise, and that unmistakable look of men who are still here, which, in their line of work, is a victory. You catch snippets of conversation. Did you see Flavian trip on his net? Yeah. Still won. Though, because the other guy passed out from the heat. They laugh. Soft and genuine. Not because it's funny, because it's true. One of them, a veteran, is cleaning his blade with a cloth that might once have been white. He doesn't look up when he speaks. The crowd wanted death today. He says, tomorrow maybe they'll want mercy. You never know. End quote. It's not bitterness. It's just statistics. You remember reading once that some gladiators fought only a handful of times a year less than you'd expect. If they were good, they became investments. Owners didn't want them dying too fast. Lose a crowd favorite, and you might lose a fortune. Some were even allowed to marry, to sign autographs, to buy their freedom with enough victories. But most didn't get there. Historians still debate the average lifespan of a gladiator. Some say it was shockingly short, less than 5 fights. Others argue many lived for years, especially if they knew when to yield and when to bleed convincingly. There's a niche, story possibly, a fabrication about a gladiator named Octavius who never killed an opponent, just disarmed them. Every time, the crowd adored him. But one day, the emperor grew bored and demanded blood. Octavius refused. The next match wasn't optional. You pass another bunk room. Empty, save for a helmet placed neatly on the bed. A bronze one, shaped like a fish, with slitted eyes and a jawline designed for intimidation. It gleams softly in the lamplight. Its owner, you suspect, won't be needing it again. The walls are full of chalk markings and oil-scrawled messages. Some are tally marks fights survived. Others are cruder. Symbols of victory, of loss, of defiance. One carving reads, simply, Lucivs, 9 matches. Still alive. Underneath it, someone added, barely. Oh. You make your way to the outer corridor, where a small shrine sits tucked between 2 columns. Flowers rest at its base. Wilted, but still fragrant. A statuette of Nemesis, the goddess of divine retribution, smiles faintly from her perch. Not the comforting kind of goddess. The kind that reminds you no one gets away with too much. A gladiator kneels here alone. Head bowed. You don't interrupt. Because in Rome, even a killer prays. Eventually, you climb the narrow steps back to the upper tier of the Colosseum. The city sprawls before you, hazy with oil smoke, glittering with torchlight, echoing with laughter and song. Rome is alive. Always. Relentlessly. And yet, somehow, in this moment, the arena feels more alive than anything else. You think back over what you've seen today. Not just the fighting, the theater, the cruelty, the absurdity. You've watched a man duel a beast, a dwarf fight, a woman, a mock sea battle sink in shallow water. and a lion that refused to play its part. You've seen gods mocked, myths murdered, justice sold in slices, and somehow, it all made sense, because the Colosseum wasn't about truth. It was about control, about showing the empire's power not just through conquest, but through curated chaos. They could make you cheer a decapitation. They could make you laugh at a crucifixion. They could make you want to come back. And most terrifying of all, you do. You leave your perch high above the arena, moving slowly now, as if your body knows the weight of what you've seen and isn't quite sure it wants more. But curiosity pulls you downward back to the guts of the Colosseum, where the people who made the spectacle possible live their invisible lives. You wander deeper into the service passages, the air damp and close. The torchlight flickers across the stone walls. And, somewhere distant, you hear the groan of rope and the bark of an order. Even now, long after the crowd has dispersed, this place thrums with motion. Someone is always cleaning, fixing, feeding, preparing. You enter a room lined with wooden benches and strange tool shooks, brushes, pads of leather, chunks of pitch and grease. It smells like ash and sweat. This is one of the armamentarian equipment room, where the weapons and armor of the day are repaired or stored. A man sits at a low bench, sharpening a blade on a whetstone. He doesn't look up, just says, "Didn't break clean today." Bent at the tip. He must have blocked hard. You realize he's talking about a gladius? Not with judgment, just with the tired detachment of a man who's filed too many swords to bother remembering who held them. Beside him is a pile of helmets, each with its own style. A Murmillo's broad crest, a Thrax's curved guard, one with a dent you don't want to guess about. You run your hand across the polished surface of one. It's still warm from the sun. Or maybe the man who wore it. Behind the forge room lies a separate chamber, one quieter, lined with scrolls and wax tablets. A slave with ink-stained fingers scribbles names onto a fresh sheet. It's a ludus registria roster of gladiators, their fight records, victories, defeats, and, most chillingly, their date of death. Some names are crossed out. Some have stars next to them. One name has 4 stars and a crude little sunburst sketched beside it. Crowd favorite. The scribe murmurs without looking up. Dead last spring. Bee sting. Of all things. You can't tell if he's joking. You keep moving, deeper still, and find a room that smells of herbs and vinegar. The medicus sits hunched over a man's leg, stitching a jagged wound with a bone needle. The patient grits his teeth, his other hand clenched into the straw mat beneath him. This isn't gentle medicine. This is battlefield patchwork. On a shelf nearby, jars of honey, spider webs, and crushed moss wait to be applied. No antiseptic, just knowledge passed down by necessity. You glance at a bundle of dried mint and wonder if it's for pain relief or just to mask the smell. Lost 2 fingers, the medicus mutters, gesturing to another man lying unconscious nearby. But he kept his right hand. Could still fight? Maybe left-handed now. Who shrugs like. He's describing a chipped cup. Historians still argue how advanced Roman medical care truly was. Some believe the gladiator schools had better survival rates than other professions, thanks to specialized physicians who treated wounds with surprising sophistication. Others insist that most injuries were left to fester, unless the fighter was worth the investment. The truth, probably, is both. In one dim alcove, you find a small altar to Asclepius, god of healing. A dried garland hangs beside it. You light a candle and say nothing. What is there to say? Back in the hallway, you pass a storage room packed floor to ceiling with props. Some are ridiculous wooden crocodiles on wheels, painted rocks, helmets shaped like boars. Others are darker, a bronze harness with hooks, chains, a wooden X-cross for a scene you hope you never see, reenacted. Even in death, the arena insists on performance. A fringe tale you once heard resurfaces of a condemned man forced to dress as Hercules and fight a lion with a wooden club. When he lost, the lion wore the lion skin. Everyone thought it was hilarious. You step out into a side courtyard now, just outside the shadow of the Colosseum. The night sky stretches overhead, scattered with stars and the faint plume of smoke from the day's fires. You exhale. Finally, fresh air. But even here, the Colosseum is present. From this angle, it looms not majestic, but monstrous, like a sleeping god, belly full of sacrifice, dreaming of applause. You trace its arches with your eyes, each tier perfectly spaced, each column carved with patient hands. It's beautiful, and terrifying, and deeply, deeply efficient. You remember what someone said earlier today, that Rome wasn't just building buildings. It was building memory. The Colosseum wasn't for the people inside. It was for the empire itself. A declaration in stone that said, "Look what we can do." Ho! The truth is, the games weren't always popular. They fell in and out of favor depending on the emperor, the economy, the mood of the people. Sometimes they were scaled back. Other times they were cranked up like a fever. But through it all, the Colosseum remained. A canvas, a stage. A warning. You walk back inside. One last time. To look at the sand. The bodies are gone. The blood is raked smooth. A single helmet lies forgotten at the edge of the arena, catching moonlight like a coin dropped into water. And for just a second, you imagine picking it up, wearing it, standing there, beneath the gaze of thousands, waiting for the gates to open, waiting for the lions, waiting for your name to be remembered. You shiver and step away, because the Colosseum never forgets. But it doesn't forgive either. It's morning now, not the hazy golden glow of yesterday's late games, but full sun, already heating the stone and stirring the dust back to life. Rome never really sleeps, and neither does the Colosseum. You find yourself back in the stands. But this time, the crowd isn't roaring. It's just beginning to trickle in. Families, merchants, a few gamblers with coin pouches, and the haunted look of men who've bet on the wrong guy too many times. You're here early today to see something different. Not a fight. Not an execution. But something stranger. A retirement ceremony. They're rare. Really rare. Most gladiators die before they ever get close. But every now and then, one survives long enough. wins enough matches, earns enough favorer, at least avoids enough sharp points to be granted freedom. They call it receiving the Rudisa wooden sword. Symbolic, gentle, a parody of all the real ones that nearly killed you. Today's honoree is named Drusus. You've heard the name whispered in the seats. A Murmillo with a record of 11 wins. No, defeats. And a scar across his jaw that looks like it tried to open his face like a book. He walks with a limp, carries his helmet under his arm. When he steps into the arena, the crowd gives a scattered cheer knot, frenzied. Not loud, just respectful. He bows, then kneels. An official steps forward and presents the wooden sword, polished, engraved. More ceremonial than practical. Drusus accepts it in both hands like it's the most fragile thing he's ever touched. The crowd applauds again. Some stand. A few children yell his name. Then, almost as quickly as it began, the moment is over. Drusus walks out not carried, not bleeding, not dead, just free. You blink. It feels impossible. He made it. Of course, not all gladiators who earned freedom actually left. Some stayed on as trainers, referees, even arena celebrities. A few returned to the sand voluntarily, especially if the fame, coin, or boredom of freedom proved unbearable. Historians still argue about the motivations behind those returns. Was it a deep-seated identity with the arena? A twisted form of loyalty to the only structure they'd ever known? Or just cold, hard desperation? A wooden sword doesn't buy a house. There's even a story half tragic, half ridiculous of a freed gladiator who became so famous he was invited to dine with a senator, only to be asked, mid-meal, to show off a little. He declined. The senator reportedly sulked for the rest of the evening. Back in your seat. The next match begins. Today, it's a hoplomachus versus a retiria shield, and spear versus net and trident. It's a classic combo. The retiarius dances lightly across the sand, trying to entangle his opponent with a net that looks more like laundry gear than a weapon. The hoplomachus presses in, methodical and cautious, his helmet's crest bobbing like a rooster. You watch them circle each other, and your eye catches something unexpected, avendor. Not unusual in itself, but he's selling figurines, tiny gladiators carved from wood or baked clay. Some wear real chainmail. Others are painted with exaggerated scars. One is holding a spear and looks suspiciously like Drusus. His freedom hasn't even lasted an hour, and someone's already cashing in on his likeness. You walk down to the vendor's stand. The man sees your interest and grins, holding up a lamp terracotta, molded in the shape of a helmet. On the side, in bloque Latin, it reads, Flavivs, 7 Vict, strong as Mars. Officiel. The man says proudly. Guaranteed likeness. We get them made after every big win. You raise an eyebrow. After a win? Well, sometimes after a good death. But people prefer the ones who lived. You walk away, shaking your head, but part of you can't help admiring it. Rome knew how to market its monsters, or its heroes. The line was blurry, In the outer ring of the Colosseum, you pass more stall-selling dried dates, cheap wine, glass beads shaped like helmets, someone selling spongas on sticks. You don't ask. Graffiti catches your eye next. Scrawled across a marble column is a name, Syllabs. Beneath it, thrice crowned, loved by girls. There are hearts, and what might be a badly drawn chicken. The chicken is a mystery. The adoration, though, is real. Some gladiators became celebrities. Their faces painted on walls. Their names shouted in taverns. Their charms rumored to bring luck in lover war. There are even letters from young Roman women begging to see a certain fighter just once more before his next match. It's strange. Thinking about a man who kills for sport being turned into a heartthrob, and yet, you get it. He survived. He excelled. In a world built on brutal rules, that kind of defiance becomes magnetic. You settle near a small group of spectators gossiping about the next games. One man holds a pamphlet, a handwritten list of bets, odds, and possible matchups. Another woman counts coins, mouthing each number like a prayer. Someone else holds a small clay statue of a retiarius and rubs its helmet for luck. You realize now that, for many Romans, this wasn't just entertainment, it was investment. Hope, distraction, bread and circuses. Sure, but the circuses came with trading cards. You glance back toward the arena. The match is over. The retiarius is lying in the sand, tangled in his own net. He raised 2 fingers. The crowd waits. The editor stands. He nods. Mercy, the retiarius is spared. You exhale. It's not always fair. But sometimes, it is, just enough to keep hope alive. The day grows hot again. The sun hanging heavy, like it's weighing down on the stone walls themselves. You find a spot in the shade. Sip something that tastes suspiciously like vinegar and regret, and watch as the arena undergoes another transformation. The crew is at it again, hauling ropes, pulling shutters, assembling platforms that creak with every nail. And then you see it. Water, again. You squint. Are they really trying this twice? You remember yesterday's soggy spectacle when mock boats thrashed around like wounded beetles, and one of Neptune's actors face planted into the shallows. You'd think that would have been enough. But apparently, Rome disagres, because they're about to reenact a mock naval disasterone of the Empire's favorite guilty pleasures. This time, though, it's not a proper naumachia. It's themed chaos. They've built a partial ship, more stage than vessel. Its hull is fixed to a rotating platform that juts out over the shallow pool. Painted waves swirl across its sides. Smoke puffs from hidden vents, suggesting fire. A mast clearly leans at a dramatic angle. The setup is absurd. The enthusiasm, very real. The crowd is already roaring. Trumpets blare. A narrator in a gaudy tunic announces the scene. A mighty Roman vessel, returning from conquest, is struck by a vengeful god. He points dramatically to the sky, where a crew member drops a bundle of red powder that explodes into a limp puff of divine wrath. A child near sneezes. Actors on the deck pretend to stagger. One throws himself overboard with such commitment that he misses the water entirely and lands with a hollow thud. The audience howls with laughter. Another actor attempts to lower a lifeboat that promptly falls apart in his hands. You swear you see him smile before screaming, "Mercy! Poseidon!" This isn't realism. This is satire. And it works, because the Romans, for all their engineering, loved a disaster. They adored failure if it belonged to someone else, especially if it could be blamed on the gods, the fates, or bad foreign weather. The scene unfolds with comedic chaos. The ship creaks, groans, and eventually splits apart in slow-motion planks, flying, props tumbling, a mechanical dolphin popping out at the wrong moment and startling a senator's wife. One actor clings to a beam and recites a monologue about the tragedy of lost wine. Another, clearly improvising, begs the audience to save him with a well-timed coin toss. And someone does. A small silver coin arcs through the air and hits the actor square on the helmet. He milks the moment, flailing dramatically, before vanishing into the pool with a splash. You chuckle despite yourself, but then the tone shifts. The narrator returns. Now, somber, he tells the story of a real Roman shipwreck from decades ago, involving prisoners, bad omens, and betrayal. The scene resets. Now the actors wear ragged tunics. The sea is darker. The comedy fades into cold reenactment. A chained group stands on the mock deck. Solji pass. The ship begins to sink. One prisoner bakes. Another resists. The crowd grows keter. This story doesn't end in rescue. This one ends in execution, one by one. The prisoners are pushed into the water shackled, helpless, gasping as they sink. Of course, they don't actually drown. Hidden platforms just below the surface catch them. But the illusion is disturbingly convincing. And you feel it again that unease Rome was so good at conjuring. That tension between theater and reality. Was this meant to honor the dead? Or just to replay them? Historians still argue whether these water spectacles were frequent or rare. Some believe they were common festival entertainment. Others argue they were reserved for moments of special cruelty or imperial whim. What's certain is that Rome had no shortage of people to reenact as victims. You glance around the crowd. Some are bored, others enthralled. A few whisper to each other about real shipwrecks they've heard of. One man claims his cousin died in a similar incident. Another says his cousin faked it and opened a fish sauce stand in Gaul. You don't know which is more Roman. The final moment arrives. The mock ship vanishes below the water. Smoke rises. A painted thunderbolt crashes from above someone, yanking a rope with more drama than skill. The crowd claps. Not a standing ovation, but polite, satisfied. The sand is drained again, quickly, efficiently. You marvel at the machinery, the trapdoors, the silent team beneath the floor who manage it all like ghosts. The arena floor resets, and a single actor remains drenched, shivering, his arms outstretched as if asking the gods why they allowed this disaster. A child in the front row throws him a crust of bread. He catches it, bows deeply, and exits. The narrator returns to offer a final line. And so, even the strongest ship may sink. But Rome? Rome floats on, Aye. The crowd claps again. Not because they believe it, because they know they're supposed to. And then, almost as quickly as it began, the audience begins to stir. Vendors move through the aisles. A man offers roasted chickpeas. A woman yells the odds for the next match. A kid drops a small clay figurine of a gladiator into the pool and watches it float. You're still seated. The chaos ebbing around you, and you find yourself strangely moved. Because that ridiculous disaster, it worked. Not as a story, but as a mirror. A way for Rome to watch itself flail, fall, and rise again always, with perfect lighting and a cheering crowd. Even in failure, the empire never stopped performing. Even in parody, it clung to power, because sometimes the realest thing you can do is fake it better than anyone else. You would think that after all the lions, swords, collapses, and chaos, Rome might take a break. Maybe a nice puppet show, a picnic, something with fewer fatalities. But no, the Colosseum is just catching its second wind, and the theme this time? Exotic animals. Lots of them, imported, paraded, occasionally worshipped and, more often than not, sent into completely avoidable mayhem. You settle into your seat again, probably too sunbaked to be comfortable and watch, as the arena floor is transformed into a makeshift jungle. They've spread palm fronds across the sand, added painted backdrops of distant mountains. Someone, bless them, has tossed down coconuts, like that'll help, trumpets sound. And out come the creatures, a giraffe, for starters, towering, awkward, confused. It looks around like it's trying to spot an escape ladder. Behind it, two handlers in leopard print tunics nudge the animal gently toward the center. The crowd gasps. A few cheer. One nobleman spills his wine. It's hard to describe just how strange this must have looked to a Roman citizen. Most had never seen anything like it. The neck alone was a miracle. People probably debated whether it was even real or just some elaborate god joke, but it is real. And it's not alone. Next comes a rhinoceros. An actual rhino snorting and stomping with a cranky wobble. Imported from Africa, at mind-bending expense. Possibly weeks at sea. Probably misérable. But here it is, trotting across the sand under the hot Roman sun. There's no fight yet. Just a parade. The announcer bellows names and origins like a game show host. From the rivers of Nubia, from the deep forests of Germania, from the deserts of Arabia, a man in front of you murmurs that he once saw a baboon bite off a man's finger in a warm-up match. You choose not to verify that. And then, from a side gate, lumbers the hippopotamus. The crowd collectively leans forward. This is rare, even more so than the giraffe. The hippo blinks, lets out a grunt, and promptly lies down like it's done with this entire empire. You feel for it. Someone in the row behind you says, "I thought it'd be bigger." Someone else says, "Wait till it opens its mouth." How? You glance back at the arena and watch as the handlers coax the hippo upright again with a pile of melons. A minor miracle. These animals aren't fighting yet. This is the preview. The setup. The audience needs to understand the players before the match begins. And yes, there will be matches. Romans didn't import this many creatures just to clap politely and take home souvenir oil lamps. Historians still debate how frequently exotic animals were used in actual combat. Some believe they were mainly featured in Venezana staged hunts, more show than real danger. Others insist the animals were often sacrificed for little more than shock value. What's certain is that logistics were a nightmare. Getting a tiger to roam alive? Not easy. Getting it to behave in an arena full of shouting humans? Downright laughable. One fringe account describes a day when they brought in 10 crocodiles. The plan? To simulate a Nile attack. The result? 8 crocodiles refused to move. One bit a handler. The last tried to escape into the stands. Nobody won. Back in the arena, the real match begins. A group of lightly armed menet throwers, spear carriers, and one unfortunate soul with a lasso enters cautiously. They're not gladiators. They're bestiaria-trained animal fighters. Often criminals or lower-class volunteers promised coin or fame. Today, their job is simple. Provoke the animals. Survive if possible. Entertain definitely. The rhino is the first challenge. It charges not at the fighters, but at a wooden cart painted like a Roman chariot. It shatters it instantly, sending a wheel spinning across the arena. The crowd erupts. One bestiarius tries to wave a red cloth. The rhino ignores it. Another bangs a shield. That works. It charges again. The man dodges barely and climbs a pole like a cat with excellent survival instincts. The giraffe, mercifully, is left alone. Probably because nobody wants to be the guy who kills a giraffe in front of children. The hippo, meanwhile, has returned to its previous nap. Someone throws a fig at it. It doesn't move. Eventually, 2 handlers guide it off the field, looking both relieved and exasperated. The highlight is the tiger, lean, golden, teeth like polished ivory. It paces with uncanny precision, eyes scanning for weakness. One of the fighters tosses a spear knot to hit, but to distract, the tiger darts the other way and pounces, sending a man flying. He lands in a roll, scrambles to his feet, and sprints to the nearest platform. He climbs just as the tiger swipes below him. The crowd roars. You grip the edge of your seat. Not because it's glorious, because it's madness. A full-grown tiger, in the middle of a city, surrounded by 20,000 people and not a single safety net. Eventually, the match is called off. The announcer, sweating through his robe, declares it a draw. The tiger is led back into its pen with an offering of raw meat. The crowd applauds, like they've just seen a clever play, and maybe they have. Because in Rome, everything is theater, even survival. Even imported extinction. And while the animals might not understand the rules, the audience does. They clap. They cheer. They tell stories. They go home and say, "You should have seen the hippo just sat there like Caesar himself." And that's the magic. Because, in the end, the Colosseum isn't about truth. It's about memory. Twisted, polished, packaged for a crowd, and today, that crowd saw a giraffe, a rhino, and a man with a lasso he had no business using. You Exhale. Tomorrow, it'll be bears. You wake before dawn the next day. Not because you're eager, but because the Colosseum demands it, even from miles away. The city seems to stretch toward it. Every alley and archway, funneling people back to the sand. You follow the tide once more. Feet aching. Senses dulled, but something deeper, pulling you forward. Today isn't about exotic animals or ridiculous naval plays. Today is one of the big match days, the kind of day they write songs about, the kind that empties temples and taverns alike. On the schedule, a duel of champions. Promised for weeks. Advertised on scrolls and shouted in markets. You hear the names echoing as you walk. Thamnus the Red and Calidus Maximus. People know them. People bet on them. As you settle into the upper rows, you feel the energy has shifted. There's tension here, not the morbid curiosity of executions, or the giddy laughter of slapstick sea battles. This is closer to sport. Loyalty. Passion. People argue. Defend their favorites. Trade odds and insults in the same breath. You lean forward, and the gates creak open. Out steps Thamnus Massive. Balt. Red cloak fluttering behind him. He carries a short sword, his face smeared with ash in jagged patterns. He's not young. His muscles are real, but worn. He walks like he's walked into this arena more than anyone ever should. And then comes Calidustler. Leaner. Helmet under his arm. His grin halfway to a smirk. His armor is polished. Almost impractical. Clearly, the favorite of someone important. He waves to the crowd like he's on parade. A woman 3 rows down gasps audibly. The match is announced. The stakes are repeated. Both men have survived more than a dozen fights. Both are crowd favorites. Neither has fought the other. Until now, a trumpet sounds. And they begin, not recklessly, not with bravado, but with the caution of men who know how this works. They circle. They test distance. Their weapons clack not ringing blows, but exploratory taps, like chess played at sword point. You forget to breathe for a moment. Then the clash starts in earnest. Thamnus lunges. Calidus sidesteps. A flurry of strikes. Sand flies. A near miss draws cheers. Calidus spins too wide and catches a nick on his thigh. He hisses. The crowd gasps. Someone throws a scarf into the air. Someone else throws up. They pause, barely reset. There's blood now. But not enough to stop. Just enough to smell. And through it all, they perform. Every dodge. Every block. Every shoulder feint is part of the language of the arena. It's not just about killing. It's about being seen. About earning the roar. The match drags on longer than usual. Most fights are over in minutes. This one crosses the quarter hour. Sweat drips. Sand sticks to skin. You notice a pattern. Thamnus keep pulling Calidus left. It's subtle, but you see it. He's setting a trap. Historians still argue whether these champion fights were choreographed, at least partially. Some claim they were staged like professional wrestling, with higher stakes. Others insist that while they weren't scripted, both men knew how to stretch a fight. To tease the audience. The truth is probably tangled somewhere in the blood-stained middle. Back on the sand. Thamnos makes his move. A shoulder fake. A low sweep. And suddenly Calidus is down. Flat on his back, Thamnos places his blade against the man's throat. The crowd goes silent. This is the moment. Thumbs matter now. In Roman tradition, the crowd might gesture thumbs up or down, but the signal was vague. Pollice verso could mean a dozen things depending on the direction. The context. The mood. Historians still bicker about whether a thumbs up meant death or mercy. Hollywood got it wrong. Frequently. You wait for the editor's call. A pause. Then a gesture. Arm out. Thumb tilted sideways. The ambiguous middle ground. Calidus will live. The crowd erupts. Thamnos steps back, breath ragged, and raises his sword in a tired salute. Calidus staggers upright. He clutches his thigh, manages a half bow, and limps from the field. Neither of them smiles. This wasn't victory. This was survival. The match is over. But the crowd's not done. As the sand is raked, you hear the buzz people debating who truly won. Someone insists Thamnos held back. Someone else claims Calidus faked the fall. A child nearby insists his dad could have beaten both. You try not to laugh. Then a herald climbs the steps and unrolls a scroll. There's an announcement. Tomorrow, a team event. 4-on-4. Champions on both sides. Rare. Risky. Guaranteed to draw an even bigger crowd. You can already feel the shift. The Colosseum never rests. It evolves. It feeds on anticipation. The next match is always bigger. You leave your seat and wander the outer ring, where vendors shout over each other, hawking pastries, olives, cheap wine, and figurines shaped like both Thamnos and Calidus, already pressed, fired, and painted. That was fast. You overhear someone ask, "Did you see Thamnos look up before striking? Like he needed permission?" Someone else says, "He's old. He knows not to kill someone the crowd likes more." A third mutters, "Calidus threw the fight." Aye, and just like that, the match becomes myth. You exit the Colosseum under the same archway where the fighters march in. A breeze kicks up, and you imagine the sand shifting behind you. Erasing footprints. Preparing the floor for something new, because in Rome, nothing ever ends. It just resets, louder. You arrive early again the next day. Stomach full of cheap bread and something vaguely fishy that may or may not have been soup. The Colosseum looms as always. That ancient mouth, yawning open, eager for its next course. But the air is different today. Anticipation hums like a held breath. The crowd feels hungrier, less festive, more electric. Word has spread. It's a group match. And not just any skirmish. This one is being promoted as a battle recreation. Aye, the arena isn't empty when you step inside. It's already dressed like a battlefield. There are props strewn across the sandfake ruins. Scorched shields, broken wagons, and even a fake well in the center. You catch the scent of smoldering oil, to a theatrical touch to create the illusion of a burned village. Above it all, a thin haze of incense swirls, half sacred, half for the stink. The announcer's voice rises, amplified by the stone. Citizens of Rome, today, a battle from our glorious past shall unfold before your eyes. Barbarians versus legionnaires, chaos versus order. May the gods bear witness. You raise an eyebrow. That's a lot of drama for a match with no real stakes, or so you think. The gates open. Out comes the first Team 4 fighters clad in patchwork furs and painted faces, playing the barbarians. They beat their chests, snarl at the crowd, wave axes that look chipped and cruel. The audience hisses, boos, throws the occasional date pit. This, you understand, is theater. Then, from the opposite gate, come the Romans' 4 gleaming figures in mock legionnaire gear, polished shields, red tunics, standard-issue sandals. They march in tight formation, even managing a half-decent testudo before spreading out to cheers. You chuckle. This isn't a match. It's a morality play with pointy bits. And then it begins. No trumpet, no ceremony, just sudden chaos. A barbarian charges with a guttural roar, and the crowd erupts. His opponent sidesteps neatly and slams him with the flat of his blade. Not fatal, not yet, but hard enough to drop him. Another 2 clash at the fake well-trading blows with wild speed, their weapons clanging in a flurry of sparks and sweat. A shield breaks. A sword goes flying. It's chaos, but crafted chaos, because make no mistake, these fighters know their marks. They've rehearsed their movements, mapped out their beats. It's brutal. Yes, but it's also precise. A rhythm, like blood-soaked ballet. You spot Thamnus again, this time playing the Roman side. He's slower than yesterday, but no less fierce. He knocks his opponent into the ruins and stomps after him, roaring like Mars himself. The crowd loses it. Historians still argue how much of these large-scale group matches were choreographed. Some claim the combat was real, but managed through non-lethal targeting strikes aimed at limbs, not organs. Others say key moments were staged entirely, especially when recreating famous battles for propaganda. And Rome loved propaganda. Today's match is clearly meant to reinforce the empire's favorite story, the noble Roman conquering the savage outsider. A fantasy in metal and sweat. But it's not all fake. One of the barbarians stumbles wrong, takes a gladius hilt to the temple, and drops hard. Doesn't move. 2 men drag him off quickly, hidden behind a curtain of raised shields. The match continues without pause, not out of disrespect, but necessity. The crowd demands flow. The remaining fighters give it to them. You lose track of time. Mesmerized. Dust kicks into the air. Blood spatters the sand not much, but enough to draw cheers. The props become weapons. One man wields a wooden beam like a battering ram. Another throws a flaming brand that misses wildly and lands dangerously close to a senator's box. The fire is put out before anyone notices or admits to noticing, and then, just as it seems the Romans will win easily, they don't. The last barbarian standing gets a lucky shot. Thamnus drops to one knee. The crowd gasps. He's not dead, just dazed. But now, the fight is even, 1-on-1. The barbarian feints left. Then dives right, trying to sweep Thamnos's legs. Thamnos catches the move, counters with a blow to the ribs, and both collapse in a heap. Silence. Then movement. Thamnos rise, barely, and lifts his sword knot in triumph. But in survival, the crowd roars. The editor stands. No need for a verdict. The match is done. The story has been told. Rome wins again, though barely. Enough to feel dramatic. Enough to keep the legend alive. You exhale, then realize your fists are clenched. This fake battle felt more real than anything you've seen all week. Maybe that's the point. As the fighters limp off the sand, the crew rushes in with rakes and buckets. The props are hauled away. The smoke clears, and the arena is blank once again. A perfect, open space, waiting for the next lie to be told. You watch the crowd file out, voices buzzing with excitement. Some talk about Thamnos. Others argue that the barbarian should have won. A boy ahead of you reenacts the final blow with a stick. His friend falls down dramatically, clutching his heart. They both giggle. Somewhere nearby, a seller hawks mini shields with today's victory etched onto the surface. The date isn't even dry yet. You pass a group of guards laughing about how one of the fighters tripped on a fake log. He broke his toe. Oh, still looked good. That's the point. Isn't it? Yes. Yes. It is, because in the Colosseum, truth matters far less than the illusion of power. The feeling of triumph, the appearance of control, whether it's choreographed or chaotic, every match serves the same purpose: make Rome look invincible. Even if it's just for a few minutes, the sun sits low over the city, casting amber light across the rooftops and gilding the Colosseum's upper arches in something almost sacred. You don't plan on returning today. Not after the battle. Not after watching Thamnos stagger from the arena. Half victor. Half ghost. But your feet lead you back anyway, drawn like a tide to the shoreline. Rome does that to you. This time, you don't go to your usual seat. You slip through a side entrance zone not meant for tourists or nobles, or even eager fans. It's narrow, half-shaded, and smells faintly of mildew. A staircase leads downward into a part of the Colosseum most people never see. The hypogeum. You descend slowly, eyes adjusting to the gloom. This is the underground, the hidden level below the arena floor, where the machinery breathes, the workers toil, and the secrets live. The floor above may shine with glory, but this is where the real magic happens. Torchlight flickers along damp walls. Chains clink in the distance. You hear the creak of wood, the slap of rope against pulley. A gust of warm, fetid air brushes your face. It smells like hay, sweat, and something worse. You've heard about this place. The trapdoor mechanisms, the elevators, the animal cages. But standing here, it's different. Claustrophobic, humming with tension. A man passes you, hunched and fast-moving. He carries a bucket full of scraps. He doesn't look up. His tunic is stained. His feet are bare. He smells like he hasn't seen the sun in a week. you realize he probably hasn't. Most of the workers here are slaves or low-status laborers, known as arena subalterns. They live beneath the empire's noise, managing its greatest stage like stagehands in a tragic comedy. A shout echoes from further down. You follow it, winding past pulley systems and scaffolds. You find a group of men wrestling with a freight platform, a crude but genius contraption powered by human muscle. The elevator rises inch by inch, ropes groaning. On top of it stands a battered wooden cage. Empty for now. You imagine what it usually holds. Tigers, bears, lions, not because it's efficient, because it's dramatic. Rome didn't just invent spectacle, it perfected it. Historians still argue over how sophisticated these mechanisms were. Some say they used counterweights, trapdoors, even water pressure systems. Others suggest most of the show relied on muscle and timing. But all agree on one thing: no civilization staged death quite like this. You turn a corner and enter a chamber with barred doors. Inside, animals. Wait, a bear paces restlessly, snorting and pawing at the ground. A cheetah lies curled in the corner, eyes half-lidded, but alert. Nearby, a smaller cage houses a trio of monkeys chattering nervously. You wonder if they know what this place means. One cage is empty, save for straw and a chewed bone. The plaque reads, Panthera. Oh. Your heart sinks. You move on. Past more platforms. More tools. One station has racks of weapons, not for the gladiators, but for the animal handlers. Hooks, tridents, nets, clubs. You pass a room where a man is sewing. He works in silence, mending a costume that resembles a satyr. Another piece lies nearby, a lion pelt, clearly artificial, with painted eyes and a corked tongue. Some matches involve actors dressed as beasts. When the real ones weren't available or reliable, Rome invented its own. It wasn't always about truth. It was about effect. One particularly fringe tale you remember. An emperor once staged a hunt where all the animals were just actors in elaborate masks. The audience loved it. One man lost a toe anyway. You find a small alcove with a shrine, just like above ground. Nemesis again, the goddess of divine balance, of retribution. There are coins at her feet, a broken spear, a strip of cloth, perhaps from a tunic. Someone's plea. Left in silence, you sit for a moment, resting your back against the wall. You try not to imagine the thousands of moments that have taken place. Here, moments of panic, preparation, punishment. This is where gladiators waited before stepping into the light, where animals paced in darkness, where decisions were made. Above you, the Colosseum is a place of applause and glory. But down here, it's a machine, grinding, relentless, hungry. You rise and follow the winding corridors back toward the staircase. Along the way, you spot graffiti carved into the wall, crude lines and symbols. Names, etched deep. One reads simply, Felix. 3 fights. Not afraid. Another says, I saw the lion first. And you pause at that one, and then you climb back into daylight. Back into noise. You step out into the corridors, ringing the arena, where the crowd begins to gather again. Today's match is smaller in execution. From what you overhear, a man who tried to bribe a magistrate. His punishment? Death by animal. Or, worse comedy, death. You consider staying. You consider leaving. You stay, because somehow, despite everything, the Colosseum pulls at you. You watch from a shadowed archway. As the man is brought out, he wears a donkey costume. No explanation. The crowd laughs before the gates even open. Then the lion emerges. Not running. Not angry, just confused. The man collapses, cries out, begs. The lion walks past him, sniffs the ground. The crowd jeers. Someone yells, "Lick him to death." Eventually, a handler retrieves the animal. The match is declared inconclusive. The man is dragged away. You never learn what happens next. The audience begins to shuffle out, restless for something bloodier. You stay a moment longer, staring at the empty sand. It's beautiful. It's awful. It's Rome. And you can't look away. You walk away from the Colosseum for a few hours, just to see if the world outside still exists. The streets are quieter here. Past the market stalls and the echoing chants, a few children kick a ball made of wrapped cloth down an alleyway. A baker sings to himself. It feels normal, almost dull, but even out here, the Colosseum lingers. In the talk of shopkeepers, in the chalk drawings of gladiators scratched onto walls, in the way every corner of Rome has learned to orbit that hungry stone beast. You duck into a tavern for bread and watered wine. The air smells like oil and smoke, and the conversation hums. Most of it is about yesterday's Fight the Group match between Romans and barbarians. A man at the bar insists he saw Thamnus spit blood into the sand between strikes. Someone else claims the whole thing was scripted, and he knows the man who wrote it. You don't argue. You just listen. Eventually, a man in his 50s leans toward you. "You want to know how it really works?" he says. Voice low and confident. You nod. And he grins like he's letting you in on a crime. "I used to sweep the floors." He begins. Years back. In the training halls. Before they even sent him into the arena. This gets your attention. The Ludus, the Gladiator School. You've heard of it. Everyone has. But few ever get a look inside. He talks as you walk. The two of you meandering through side streets that twist like intestines. There's more than one Ludus, he says. But the big one? That's the Ludus Magnus. Right beside the Colosseum. Underground tunnels connect them. Real fancy. Real private. Oh. You reach the edge of a wide courtyard. Columns circle the space. Half in shadow. Sand covers the ground here too. But it's smoother. Softer. A few young men are sparring in the center. Under the watch of a stocky trainer with a crooked nose. No crowds here. The man murmurs. Just pain and repetition. End of. You step closer, unnoticed, and watch the routine unfold. One fighter lunges. Misses. The trainer slaps him upside the head. Again. And again. No applause. No drama. Just muscle memory being beaten into place. This is where gladiators are made. The man gestures toward the walls, where wooden weapons hang in tidy rows. They train with those, heavier than the real ones. Build strength. Build form. Break bad habits. You see a boy barely old enough to shave struggling to lift a practice sword. He grunts. Nearly topples. Steadies himself. His opponent waits patiently. No mocking. No smirks. Just focus. Because here, failure doesn't mean embarrassment. It means death later. You move around the edge of the courtyard, taking in the small details. Water jugs in the corner. Bloodied cloths drying in the sun. A wall chart scratched with names, ranks, and notations in chalk. You spot a familiar name. Kalitus. A line next to it reads, 8 wins. 1. Mercy. Not due to luck. Another name is already smudged out, erased. Below the courtyard lies the barracks. You descend a narrow staircase and step into a long hallway lined with cells. Some are open, some closed. Each holds a bed, a jug, maybe a charm nailed to the walla, little carved god, or a strip of a lover's scarf. This isn't prison. It's investment. These men are property. Valuable. Dangerous property. Kept healthy. Fed well. Trained hard. But always, ultimately, owned. You pass one open door and hear quiet sobbing. A man sits on his cot, face buried in his hands. Another sits across from him, humming softly. It's not a song. It's a rhythm. A calming one. You don't ask. Not your place. Historians still argue about the emotional lives of gladiators. Were they resigned, proud, traumatized? Some inscriptions suggest camaraderie and loyalty. Others hint at envy, fear, and desperation. It's likely the truth lay somewhere in between equal parts fraternity and fatalism. Back upstairs. The trainer finally takes a break. He wipes his brow, barks an order, and the fighters drop into stretches like obedient dogs. You approach, and he eyes you. Spectator, he asks. You nod. Good. He grunts. We trained for you. Oh, then he turns and walks off, grumbling something about spoiled figs and slow footwork. The fighters resume their drills, this time with shields. You watch as one man slips, is knocked down, then immediately pushed back onto his feet by his partner. There's no room for weakness here. Only repetition. Only rhythm. You leave the training yard as the sun begins to sink. And when you step back toward the Colosseum, now casting long shadows like claws across the ground, you realize something. The fights may happen on the sand, but the real battles are won in the silence between them, in bruised muscles, in broken habits, in the darkness of a cell, where a man whispers his name to himself, just to remember he still has one. You reach the arches again. The crowd is already gathering for the evening's match. But you stay back a while, just outside the light. Just long enough to hear the breathing of the beast, because now you understand what feeds it. Not just blood, not just fear, but discipline, and Rome has more of that than any empire should. Twilight settles like a worn robe over the city, and the Colosseum gleams beneath it, lit by torchlight, echoing with voices too loud to belong to anyone, at peace. The matches tonight have been heavily advertised, with rumors whispering of something new, something never before seen, though no one really knows what that means. You shuffle in with the others, more out of momentum than curiosity, and find your usual seat. Legs aching, mind somewhere between history and hallucination. A fanfare erupts trumpets, drums, maybe a pan flute. If your ears aren't playing tricksand, the editor rises to address the crowd. You half expect him to sprout wings by now. Instead, he just raises his hand and announces tonight's theme. Myths made flesh. Oh no. It's going to be one of those, the arena goes black. Save for a few flickering torches. Smoke begins to billow in from the side gates, the kind that stings your throat just enough to feel immersive. When the light returns, the floor has been transformed again. Rocky outcrops, low fake mountains, coiled ropes pretending to be snakes. A stylized mural has been painted onto the sand, something vaguely Mediterranean, with suns and waves and ominous eyes. And then, the actors emerge, but they're not soldiers. They're gods, or at least, that's the idea. A towering man in gold body paint lumbers across the stage, arms raised as if dragging the sky behind him. The announcer proclaims him Atlas, though the actor looks more like a disgruntled wrestler from Gaul. Behind him trails a woman in flowing silks, face veiled. Torch in hand, Hecate, goddess of crossroads. A boy next to you whispers, "She's wearing perfume. I can smell it from here." Then, a third figure steps forward, masked, cloaked, wielding a trident. Neptune, or Poseidon, depending on which crowd they're trying to impress tonight. The announcer's voice booms over the arena. Tonight, mortals shall battle monsters drawn from the oldest myths. May their courage be judged by the gods. You suppress a laugh. This is less history and more fever dream. But Rome doesn't care. If they can build it, they'll believe it. And if they believe it, it becomes real. The match begins. 4 gladiators enter dressed, not in traditional armor, but in stylized garb, meant to represent heroes of legend. One wears a lion's pelt, clearly meant to be Hercules. Another carries twin swords and a feathered headdress, possibly Perseus. The other 2? Unclear. Maybe stand-ins for Theseus and Jason. But, with more sequins than you'd expect, they move through the faux terrain, dramatic and cautious. The audience is hooked. Even you lean forward. Then the first monster appears. It's a man in a Hydra costume. Yes, a Hydra. He's got 3 dragon heads, mounted on poles strapped to his back, waving slightly out of sync as he moves. It's ridiculous, but he's fast darting forward with sudden lunges, using the heads as distractions before striking with a dagger. The heroes engage. One flanks, one distracts. It's theater combat but with sharp edges, and when one of the Hydra's heads falls off, on purpose, you hope. The crowd erupts. The announcer shouts, "One head down, 2 more remain." The match continues, like this part circus, part opera, part. Real blood. More monsters appear. A minotaur, a tall man in a horned helmet with a massive axe. Snorting like a bull. He charges. One hero dives and rolls. Another is clipped, his shoulder gushing briefly, before he's pulled away by a handler. A harpy flies in next. Sort of. She's attached to a rope and pulley rig that lets her swing over the sand, screeching and tossing feathers like an unhinged pillow. She's mostly theater. But at one point, she lands awkwardly and kicks a fighter in the ribs. He stays down. Not permanently, but enough to look convincing. Then, silence, and the final monster enters. A Cerberus, 3 men in a single costume, each with a canine head strapped over theirs, moving in coordinated lunges. Ropes linking their arms to simulate a shared body. The illusion works sort of. Mostly. It's just chaos. The beast stumbles at one point. One of the heads pops off. The audience howls with laughter. But then something strange happens. The laughter fades. Because the remaining gladiator Hercules, still upright, is now really fighting. He breaks formation. Dodges, slashes. And 2 of the Cerberus actors drop. One, clutching a bleeding arm. The last man stares, unsure whether to continue the performance or surrender. The crowd hesitates. Then, cheers, because once again, illusion has met real violence, and the line has blurred beyond recognition. Historians still puzzle over these mythological reenactments. Were they meant as parody, tribute, spiritual expression, or just elaborate excuses to stage a fight with extra pizzazz? Some scholars even believe emperors used them to test divine favor, letting mortals defeat monsters in hopes of pleasing the gods. You watch Hercules help one of the fallen actors to his feet. There's no animosity, just fatigue. He raises his sword. The crowd applauds. The match is over. The gods recede. The monsters are carried out. The sand is raked again. You remain seated as the lights dim. Heart oddly quiet, because tonight wasn't just about violence or valor. It was about belief, the kind of belief that lets a city turn myths into motion, that lets thousands pretend, for 1 hour, that legends walk among them. Even if one of those legends trips over his own tail, the next morning, the streets near the Colosseum are unusually still. A layer of dust hangs in the air like old breath. You wander alone now, your sandals scraping softly over worn stones, past closed stalls and sleeping dogs. After all the blood and gods and monsters, silence feels like a trick, but the Colosseum is never truly quiet. As you approach, you spot a group gathered near the base of the building, not vendors or spectators, but workers, clustering in a half-circle, all focused on something behind a cart. You edge closer, curious, and see what's caused the fuss. A statue, or rather, the unveiling of one, freshly chiseled from pale stone. Still powdery in places, it depicts a man in mid-motion, shield raised, gladius back. The essence of defiance carved into his face. His name is etched at the base. Livius, champion of the arena. Below it, smaller, fell in glory. 57 matches. 56 victories. You blink. You recognize the name he fought 3 days ago. Quietly, efficiently, no grand gestures. But he won. The crowd loved him. And now he's immortalized. One worker mutters. Didn't even see it coming. 1 second up. Next. Second done. Another shrugs. Better than being forgotten. That's the goal. Isn't it? In Rome. There are only 2 endings. Fade into dust. Or become stone. You walk on, thinking of the thousands who've stepped into that arena with nothing but a blade and a prayer. How many were honored? How many erased? Inside. The Colosseum is still being swept, prepped, and painted for today's event, an execution. But not just any. This one, the whisper goes, involves a mock trial. You've never seen one of those. You find your usual seat, folding into the crowd, just as the ceremony begins. A wooden dais is wheeled into the center of the arena, followed by a man in a white robe posing as a judge and another in chains. The accused. Beside them, 3 witnesses. Actors dressed in absurd togas with exaggerated scrolls and wigs that look like sheepdogs. A voice booms. In the case of theft from the temple of Saturn, let the accused be judged. The crowd laughs. This is a comedy execution. A strange and deeply Roman invention. The accused, a real criminal, is paraded through a staged trial, complete with witnesses, testimony, and verdict. But no matter how ridiculous the process, the ending is always the same: guilty. The defendant protests his innocence in rhyming verse. The judge interrupts with a pun. One witness sobs loudly while secretly munching olives. Another claims he saw the theft but was too full of wine to stop it. Oh, you're not sure if you're watching punishment or satire. Then the sentence is read. For this unholy theft, the gods demand judgment. You shall become Icarus. And so. The crowd gasps. The man is dressed quickly by attendant's wings strapped to his arms, feathers glued hastily across his back. A golden mask is placed over his face. He's hoisted up by a crude pulley system and lifted slowly into the air. He flaps once, twice. A small cheer, then one of the ropes is cut. He falls not from the sky, but from a platform maybe 15 feet high onto a hidden spike. The laughter stops. The play is over. The blood is real. Historians still argue whether these theatrical executions were meant to mock the condemned, instruct the crowd, or entertain the elite. Some call them a final insult. Others see them as a twisted blend of myth and morality. Either way, they worked. No one watching ever forgot them. The workers rush in. The wings are removed. The blood is raked. The dais is wheeled away. Just another act on a long day's schedule. You wander during the break. Not toward the food stalls, but down a narrow hallway that leads beneath the stands. Here. The walls are etched with names some legible, some barely scratches. Fans, fighters, staff, ghosts. You pause at one, Valens. 14 matches. Still waiting. And you wonder, waiting for what? Fame? Forgiveness? Or just one more chance? You turn the corner and find a group of children with wooden swords, reenacting what they just saw. One wears a paper wing. Another pretends to fall. They laugh. Rome teaches early. You return to your seat, watching as the crowd regathers. Next up, a demonstration of barbarian customs. You brace yourself. It's two men in dyed furs, performing a mock ritual chanting nonsense syllables and dancing in a circle before pretending to roast a Roman centurion over an invisible fire. The audience finds this hilarious. You don't. Because behind the laughs is fear, a deep-rooted Roman instinct to laugh at what they don't understand, to reduce foreign cultures to costumes and choreography, to turn threats into punchlines. And you realize the Colosseum doesn't just kill bodies, it kills nuance. Turns everything foreigners, gods, even morality, into a punchline or a punishment. The matches may end. The blood may dry, but the message echoes louder than any cheer. Rome always wins, even when it's just pretending. You return one last time, because something in you demands it. Maybe closure. Maybe morbid loyalty. Maybe it's just what Rome does to people. You step into the shadow of the Colosseum, knowing that today is different. There are no matches on the schedule. No parades. No executions. Today is a rest day, but the gates are open. People drift in, not tourists. Not nobles. Not workers. Just citizens. Regular ones. Some light incense at small altars around the perimeter. Others leave fruit, or coins, or written prayers in the cracks between bricks. A mother holds a child up to touch the wall. A veteran leans on his cane and murmurs names into the stone. You sit in your usual spot, not because you expect anything to happen, but because this arena has become your anchor in this chaotic, glittering city. You've seen gods bleed here. You've seen men turn to myths. And for a place soaked in violence, today it feels oddly peaceful. A breeze passes through the arches, dust rises in a lazy spiral, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, you start to understand what the Colosseum really is. Not just a place of death, but of performance, of expectation, of endless, polished, finely tuned illusion. Everything here is calculated. The pain, the glory, the comedy, even the quiet days like this, just another beat in the rhythm of empire. When you think of the thousands who walked into this arena, knowing they might not walk back out, what sticks with you isn't the fighting. It's the acting, the way they smiled at the crowd, the way they waited for the signal, the way they lifted their swords with hands that must have trembled. You rise and walk the upper corridor, tracing your fingers along the wall. It's pitted and worn, scorched in places. You wonder how many of the ancient inscriptions are still hidden underneath the plaster and soot. A young boy chases a pigeon near the exit. An older woman stops to leave a single daisy by the eastern gate. Even in stillness, the arena moves. Its power doesn't just come from noise. It comes from memory, from repetition, from a culture that believed the strongest thing you could do was turn fear into choreography. Historians still struggle to agree on whether the Colosseum was more about punishment or entertainment. The line was never clear. Perhaps it wasn't meant to be. The games weren't meant to reflect justice or morality. They were meant to reflect Rome brutal, Brilliant. Contradictory Rome. A lion devouring a thief might shock a few, but a lion devouring a man dressed as Icarus while the crowd cheered. That told a story, a warning, a myth repurposed to serve empire. You sit on the edge of a column and close your eyes, just listening. The Colosseum whispers. If you let it, you hear the rattle of chains, the distant stomp of a tired beast, the slap of sandals against stone, the roar of a crowd that's been dead for centuries, and beneath it all, one voice. Always, Rome wins. Rome wins. Rome wins. Not because it's fair, not because it's just, but because it's relentless, and when you finally stand and take your last step out through those arches, you realize you've carried something with you. Not a souvenir, not even a memory, but a lesson. That spectacle is power. That myth is stronger than muscle, and that the greatest empires don't just conquer lands, they conquer stories. You walk into the Roman sun, not triumphant, not beaten, just aware of what the Colosseum was, what it still is, what it always will be. And now, you let that image soften, the arena quiet, the arches pale and glowing under the moon. No cheers, no drums, no swords, just stillness. You walk away, your footsteps slow, each one a little quieter than the last. Rome shrinks behind you, not in size, but in volume. The noise fades, the heat lifts, the stories settle. You remember the sand, the masks, the pulleys beneath the stage. You remember the beasts who didn't want to fight, the men who did, the crowds who came not to judge, but to feel something real in a world of marble. And you remember the strange truth that the most powerful force in that whole empire wasn't a lion, or a champion, or even an emperor. It was attention. Because when tens of thousands of eyes looked at something, really looked, it became real. Even if it was a lie, even if it was a man in a fake Hydra costume falling flat on his face. So now, back in your own quiet space, let that weight slip off you. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breath slow. You've wandered through sand and shadows, followed footsteps across a blood-stained stage, and now there's nothing left but the gentle hum of history softening into sleep. There is no roar now, just the soft whistle of wind past old stones, the hush of the past tucking itself in. And maybe, just maybe, you'll dream of applause that means nothing, or of gods who forget their lines, or of a lion who sits down and refuses to play its part, because even in a world ruled by spectacle, sometimes stillness wins. Good night. Sweet dreams.